Telling the Untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for another 3 hours of the most disruptive show, not only in those states, but in the whole universe. In the Politically Independent Corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So
let's get to the headlines here. Thanks for that one, Jamarl.
You're welcome.
Second day in a row.
Always here. Ever present, ever vigilant. I'm here.
You are. Yeah, remarkably so. All right. And in the news, first of all, Trump is calling for a repeal of Article 230. Piece of internet legislation, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is under threat by President Trump. At its core, the law provides immunity for website publishers from third-party content. Section 230 says the internet platforms that host third-party content, such as tweets on Twitter, posts on Facebook, photos on Instagram, reviews on Yelp, news outlets, reader comments, and, in case you missed it, tweets, of course, on Twitter. Those internet platforms are not liable for what those third parties post, with a few exceptions. This allows websites driven by user-generated content to exist flat out. Without this law, a Yelp reviewer could post something defamatory about a business, and that business could sue the reviewer and Yelp for libel. With Section 230, the business could only sue the reviewer for libel, not Yelp. Yesterday at 12:08 p.m., after Facebook and Twitter deleted posts containing factual inaccuracies about the risks of COVID-19, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Repeal Section 230," end quote. That would be a big deal. That would be a major blow to the internet. I think the EFF has called Section 230 something like the law that makes the internet possible, or the law that makes free speech on the internet possible. And again, without that, you would have all of the tech companies, basically, any tech company that hosts somebody else's speech become liable for that person's speech. This is, in some sense, one of those major props that support the internet as we now know and use it.
Yes.
Pence's team, yeah, go for it, Jamarl.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, 1,000%. The web doesn't work without that article.
100%. Pence's team has agreed to a plexiglass barrier in advance of tonight's debate between the vice presidential candidates. In advance of Vice President Pence and Senator Kamala Harris's debate tonight, Pence's team agreed to allow that divider. This comes according to the Commission on Presidential Debates. The concession came after Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, told the Washington Post earlier Tuesday that their team did not view plexiglass dividers as medically necessary, given that the two debaters will be more than 12 feet apart. This comes as Trump's aide Stephen Miller tested positive for the coronavirus. He is married to one of Pence's top staffers, Katie Miller, who had traveled to Salt Lake City to help the vice president, potentially jeopardizing her involvement in the event. She had previously been infected with the coronavirus, and it's not clear what effect her husband's diagnosis would have on the Pence entourage. The University of Utah, the site of the debate, requires a 14-day self-quarantine for anyone exposed to someone with COVID-19. Yesterday afternoon, Joe Biden spoke overlooking the battlefield where Union soldiers tilted the tide of the Civil War. That was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm going to quote from Biden here. "Today, once again, we are a house divided." He is echoing the words of President Abraham Lincoln. "But that, my friends, can no longer be." He went on, quote, "As I look across America today, I'm concerned. The country is in a dangerous place. Our trust in each other is ebbing. Hope is elusive. Too many Americans see our public life not as an arena for the mediation of our differences. Rather, they see it as an occasion for total, unrelenting partisan warfare. Instead of treating the other party as the opposition, we treat them as the enemy. This must end." End quote. Biden's speech came on the same day that a Monmouth University poll showed him leading Trump by 11 percentage points in Pennsylvania, a critical swing state that could tip the winner over 270 electoral votes on November 3rd.
This is why Democrats lose, Shane. That speech is why Democrats lose. It is political partisan warfare. And if one side is looking at the space that way, and the other side isn't, the side that is not is going to get eaten alive. Biden may win this race, but when he gets in office, he is going to get eaten alive if that's the perspective that he's taken in office. Mark my words.
We'll see. We'll see. I honestly, I don't know. We should come back to this, honestly. This would probably be a good conversation for after your monologue. Mexico's Cancun is bracing for possibly catastrophic Hurricane Delta. Late on Tuesday, the Category 4 hurricane on the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale was packing maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. That's down from 145 miles per hour earlier in the evening, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center. Mexicans formed long lines at supermarkets near Cancun on Tuesday to stock up in preparation for a hit overnight from powerful Hurricane Delta, which weakened slightly again as it bore down on the Caribbean resort and its famous shoreline. Delta is forecast to weaken and linger over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula before strengthening again in the Gulf of Mexico, where oil companies were bracing for impacts on their installations and ports were closed. Officials ordered evacuations of Cancun's hotel zone and other coastal areas and opened the city's convention center as a shelter. The pandemic has made it harder to get health care in rural areas. A new nationwide poll shows that 1 in every 4 rural U.S. households have been unable to get medical care for serious problems. Among those households that had trouble getting care, more than half reported that a family member experienced negative health consequences as a result. That poll, by the way, was conducted by NPR, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public School, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our next headline, Eddie Van Halen, the rock guitar virtuoso, has died at the age of 65. The legendary guitarist and co-founder of Van Halen died after a long battle with cancer. Mr. Van Halen was widely revered by his peers for perfecting the technique of two-handed tapping on the guitar neck. He was born in Amsterdam, began as a devoted fan of Eric Clapton. By 1974, he had consolidated a group of musicians into a band using the title Van Halen, including his brother, drummer Alex Van Halen, vocalist David Lee Roth, and bassist Michael Anthony. Mr. Van Halen's son, Wolfgang, said in a statement that his father had, quote, lost his long and arduous battle with cancer, end quote. That statement did not say where he died. A long-awaited report from top Democratic congressional lawmakers about the 4 biggest tech giants sent a clear message on its release yesterday. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google engage in a range of anti-competitive behavior, and U.S. antitrust laws need an overhaul to allow for more competition in the U.S. internet economy. The report's introduction states it like this, quote, to put it simply, companies that once were scrappy, underdog startups that challenge the status quo have become the kinds of monopolies we last saw in the era of oil barons and railroad tycoons, end quote. The report from Democratic lawmakers recommends creating new laws that would potentially break up tech companies and make it harder for them to pursue acquisitions. It also calls for clarifying existing antitrust laws with the goal of making them easier to enforce, particularly for tech companies. For now, the report's recommendations are only high-level guidance to Congress for potential future legislation. It won't lead to immediate action against these companies. And Jamarl, this brings to mind what we were talking about in our first headline with repealing Section 230. If you had, within the span of a year, I'm not saying this will happen because I think Section 230 is fairly well guarded and fairly well received by a variety of consumer and civil rights organizations, including, as I mentioned, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They're like the biggest org working in that space, I would say, other than, in the tech space specifically, other than the ACLU generally on civil liberties. I don't think either of them would like that. I think they would push back hard, and I think they could get public support behind it because, well, frankly, just about everyone uses the internet, and I think they can make the case that just about everyone needs that law to be able to express their opinions through the internet. But if you had something like that, if you had some change attempt to reform Section 230 at the same time as you had an antitrust lawsuit trying to break these big tech companies up, I could see the major shifts fairly quickly in the way the internet works. The other side of this, though, is our government's pretty sclerotic, and I'm not sure that I could actually get that done. What's your take, though?
That's a good point. I did a video on this yesterday, and that's what you hit your head on. Like Section 230 allows those companies, it's basically they're not at fault for whatever happens on those companies, but it also allows those companies discretion to remove things that they believe go too far. And that's where it gets dodgy to some degree, because that also allows them to get rid of, like Press TV, Telesur, or us. The catch becomes, and I agree with you, what do they reform it to? Like, if you change it, what are they going to change it to? What is it going to look like? And what rule set are they going to put in place that's going to allow people to express their opinions without this notion of censorship? And I don't know what that looks like. And so, I agree with you, 1,000%.
Yeah, it could get weird. We'll see, though. In our next headline, a Greek Greek court has declared the, quote, Golden Dawn Party, that's the name of the party, Golden Dawn, is a criminal organization. After a trial lasting for more than 5 years, the leadership of Greece's neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party has been convicted of running a criminal organization. Big crowds gathered outside the court in Athens as the judges gave verdicts on 68 defendants. Golden Dawn won 18 members of parliament in 2012 as Greeks were battered by a financial crisis, the one that hit the world, although they no longer have any members in parliament. The criminal inquiry into the party began with the murder of an anti-fascist rapper in 2013. Leader of the group and 6 colleagues were convicted of heading a criminal group. The supporter was found guilty of murdering an anti-racist musician, and 15 others were convicted of conspiracy in the case. Some 2,000 police were being deployed around Athens appeals court as thousands of protesters demanded long jail terms, carrying banners that read, quote, "Fear will not win," and "Nazis in prison." 2 slogans there. Greek media was reporting this. Golden Dawn officially denied being a neo-Nazi movement, but its badge closely resembled a swastika. Some senior members praised Adolf Hitler, and the clothing of choice at anti-immigrant protests was black T-shirts and combat trousers, which does sound pretty, fashy, to use that term. And in Kyrgyzstan, the prime minister has resigned. Prime Minister Kubatbek Boronov resigned Tuesday after widespread unrest pushed the country's electoral body to cancel the results of Sunday's parliament elections. Boronov, an ally of President Surunbay Jeenbekov, was replaced by a nationalist politician the protesters released from the jail the day before. Unrest over the vote left almost 700 hurt and 1 dead and appeared to be spreading Tuesday to other parts of the country. Kyrgyzstan's Central Electoral Commission said that it had, quote, invalidated the election results, end quote, which saw parties close to Jeenbekov dominate results amid accusations of mass vote buying. Those results sparked a tumultuous Monday night in the capital, Bishkek, with protesters seizing government buildings and freeing high-profile politicians from prison, including former President Almazbek Atambayev. And with that, that's the news. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That's the news, man. We should come back to the Section 230 thing for just a second. This is a big deal. The other side of this, of course, is why has this come under scrutiny? Why has this come under attack? It appears to me because social media companies are increasingly being pressured by members of the public, by think tanks, by parts of the media establishment, and certainly by some politicians. They're being pressured to censor speech on their platforms. We saw this actually with Facebook kicking off all of QAnon. That's another headline we didn't get to yesterday. We're probably going to be talking about that, bringing that into the conversation later at 8:30 when we talk to Bradley Blankenship. But that's the other side of this, is that it seems to me like the government itself and social media companies, through the power of moral suasion, have been pushed into censoring people on their platforms. That sort of begs the question of what their status as a publisher actually is. Whether they are a publisher, whether they should be treated as such. I don't know. What's your take on that issue, Jamarl?
Well, the thing is, 230 allows them to do it. I mean, 230, they call it sword and shield. Basically, it allows them to publish this information, not libel, but also to say, yeah, I'm not going to allow that Nazi to spew that. Or I'm not going to allow Donald Trump to get on and say, oh, this is just like the flu. Look at me. I'm a spring chicken. I feel like I was 20 years ago. Like, he's lying. And he's lying in a way that's going to get people killed. In the way that he has already clearly have gotten people killed. I guess I'm saying, as much as I complain about it, the problem becomes, what's that line? It's kind of like pornography. It's like, I know it when I see it, but how do I write it into law in a way that doesn't exclude stuff that is not actually pornography? And so you get into, there needs to be a debate where people can have, yes. There needs to be a public forum, yes. Where does the line go? And that's the rub. Because I've met people who would say something is racist when I'm like, you guys are insane. I've met people who would say something is offensive when I would say you're insane. And so it becomes, those people would be perfectly okay with saying, no, that line is over there in regards to, I don't like that person having a particular opinion. By the same token, my point of view is, no, let them speak. But I would have a line also. And the problem is, where's that line? That's the catch. And I don't know how to answer that. And I don't know how to put that into written word, into law, in a way that doesn't necessarily screw somebody over. Look, let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. We are coming to you live from our station in D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking it in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you're digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content, give us a like, share that content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy to call in. It's official. It's official. Trump is out of his depth. He will lose this election. He will lose this election in a landslide. Mark my words. And he would lose it to the most beatable Democrat in the history of Democrats. And I would even go so far to venture, if I may be so bold, future Democrat that would ever come about. The argument that you lost to reality show hosts is going to be replaced by you lost to a man suffering from clear and persistent cognitive collapse. Yesterday, Donald Trump triggered a sell-off in the equity markets on calling an end to trade talks until after the election. And of course, he did this in her Twitter rage. Nancy Pelosi is asking for $2.4 trillion to bail out poorly run, high-crime Democratic states, money that is in no way related to COVID-19. We made a great, generous offer of $1.6 trillion, and as usual, she is not negotiating in good faith. I am rejecting their request and looking to further our country. I've instructed the representatives to stop negotiating until after the election, when immediately after, we will pass a major stimulus bill that focuses on hard-working Americans and small businesses. There's more, but that's all you need. I, President of the United States, Donald Trump, while 30 million people are out of a job, 200,000 people are dead, 7 million people are infected with a virus that I am absolutely culpable for. And instead of dealing with the desperation of those people being flung from their homes, or those people, 30 million and more without health care, I am done. Won't negotiate. The Democrats are offering $2.4 trillion, and you're offering $1.6 trillion. And are you serious? The public watched you give trillions to oligarchs, and you're quibbling over less than $1 trillion to the American public to deal with a disease, a virus that you are riddled with at this point, and that you in no way dealt with in any real, tangible, earnest way. That's what we are talking about. And you did this on Twitter. You know what immediately happened? Stock markets drop, newspapers, Trump stops negotiating. Why? Because he doesn't want to give the American public the trillion gap. The Democratic Party is offering you $2.4 trillion before an election to get the economy up and running and get people whole. And the president of the United States says no. Now, this doesn't just punch the poor. This also freaked out the oligarchs. Jerome Powell, the hardest working man, rich man, he's our Fed chair. At the time that Trump was doing this, was out there screaming, pleading, begging for money. Too little support would lead to a weak recovery, creating unnecessary hardship for households and businesses, Powell said on a virtual address. Over time, household insolvencies and business bankruptcies would rise, harming the productive capacity of the economy and holding back wage growth. The stark warning comes as a recent jobs report shows sharply declining job growth in companies, including major airlines, which have begun a fresh round of layoffs. This is your country. And now you've just told the country, I'm done. I'm done to the election. Trump relented on this and basically said, if I am sent a standalone bill for stimulus checks, they will go out to our great people immediately. Which one is it? You just said stop negotiating, and now you're talking about stimulus checks. Why am I so certain that Donald Trump will lose this race? It's that. You've just told the American public that you're done trying to deal with their material needs, with the Democratic Party offering over $2 trillion. This is stupidity on a grand level. Why is Trump doing this? Is it the drugs? Meaning, is it the experimental drugs that they fused in his body, his COVID-riddled body? Is it the steroids? Is it a fever, just a fever rage where he's raging about on Twitter, bashing his fingers, attacking Facebook, and then making stupid remarks like this? Or is it an infinitely thin-skinned man who just got the embarrassment of his life, downplaying a virus, a disease that 200,000 people have died for, 7 million people are infected with, downplaying it, a disease that has destroyed our economy, and then catches it himself, something that was infinitely foreseeable, shout out to God, and he's embarrassed, drags himself from the hospital too soon, gets up there, and does this. The catch here is tragedy begets tragedy. I had a friend of mine, I'll end it on this. I had a friend of mine, chess player. He's at a tournament. He loses a piece. Immediately loses another piece. Loses his queen, resign. The first instance wrecked him. The issue here is what's going on inside. It wasn't that his position had deteriorated that badly. No, it was the internal thing of actually screwing up and losing that piece in the first part that just discombobulated him. It's not that Trump is in a fever delirium. He's embarrassed. And being embarrassed, he's making mistakes like this. Trump is going to lose this race. Joe Biden is going to go out and say, I'm going to give you guys money. And the president of the United States didn't care. What do you think, Shane? Do you think Trump basically saying, I'm done with negotiations that are trying to deal with the material concerns, where you have the rich and the poor basically up in arms? Is this enough to call this race done?
I'm not going to say anything like that, but I'm thinking Biden looks stronger than Trump at this point. Definitely going into the election. The fact that not only Trump got sick, if Trump had been the only one to get sick, if you hadn't had on that same weekend a wave of GOP senators, Governor Chris Christie, former Governor Chris Christie, if they hadn't been infected, there might be a different take, because then he would be getting some of the sympathy vote, if that makes sense. Especially, I think, you can criticize him for saying that don't let the virus dominate you, for downplaying it. But if he were the only one to be affected, I think people would, kind of empathize with him. But the fact that it seems like he or somebody close to him, at least, the idea is that he's going to be responsible for it. He's certainly going to be held to account for it by a vast majority of figures in the media, by Biden, I'm sure, by pretty much any slightly more neutral onlooker. I don't think things are looking good for him right now. And that's going to be a story. I mean, you get infected with COVID. And then even if you beat it, that's like at least a week-long process. And then if you don't beat it, it's like a potentially months-long process. It's going to be an ongoing thing. How he has brought it into the White House, how he personally managed. I'll put it like this. We should care more about the 200,000 plus people who have died so far in the U.S. alone from this virus. We should, but that's a statistic, and it's easy for our eyes to sort of glaze over. If you look at Trump getting sick and Trump acting apparently pretty irresponsibly and getting a bunch of other people close to him in the administration sick, that's like a human level story that we can kind of understand. And even though these aren't particularly people that most people care about, the politicians, I mean, for the most part, it does show that there's something rotten in Denmark. You see what I'm saying? So I think that story is going to grow. I think that's going to persist throughout October. And I think that in some sense is what's going to define the immediate history that leads up to the election. That's my take on it. Jamarl, what's yours?
No, I love that. Yeah, I love that. I agree with you. I mean, it's problematic, to put it mildly. I mean, like, what's the death toll? 208,000 now? And, I think the president of the United States is basically flailing. I mean, it seems discombobulated. And by the way, let's play a number game. How many people in the legislative branch do you think have been infected with COVID-19? I mean, at this point, the United States is a petri dish, even in the White House itself. How many do you think? Give me a guess. And let me see. Frontline workers and everybody else that's associated with it. And you better not, don't search. Give me a guess.
I'm going to give you a percentage guess. I'm going to guess this is totally out of nowhere, but 4%. It's less than the national
Give me a number.
average.
No weaselly stuff like that. Give me a number.
No, but here's the thing. That's again, I could give you a number. We could just tally it up. But last I checked, the overall infection rate in the U.S. was 7%. Uh-huh. My guess is it's a bit lower than that, but not substantially lower. It's not 0%. It's probably not 1%. I would guess 4%. That seems like a round number to me.
See, but I don't know how many. I don't know how many frontline workers and people are in Congress and stuff like that. It's like, 535 members of Congress, but we're talking about people who work with them and everybody else. So I don't know what that 4% means in that terms. I need a flat number
20.
from you, Shane.
Call it 21. Yeah, 21. That's about 4%.
100.
Good God.
100. There are now 123 frontline workers in Capitol Complex who have been tested positive or presumed positive from COVID-19. Stephen Miller, even, that fascist, he even has been infected.
But who are you talking about? You say essential workers. But are those Congress people? Who are you talking about?
Well, it's like, so this article, let's see, what's this? So it's an article, I think it's called Capitol Press or something. And they're basically making the point that when you take frontline workers, right here, coronavirus cases keep rising in Capitol Hill amid calls for more testing. I'm sorry, I'm really stuffed up this morning. But this guy, Chris Marquette, and this is the roll call. And they're basically saying there are now 123 legislative branch employees or contractors who have tested positive or presumed positive COVID-19, according to Ashley Phelps, a Republican spokeswoman for the House Administration Committee. This total has increased by 20 since August 28.
That's not Congress people, though. I just want to be clear.
No, not congressmen. I didn't mean, no. I mean congressmen. No, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry if that's what I came across as. No, I just meant people who work in Capitol Hill. It doesn't have to be like the congressmen themselves.
Oh, yeah. But again, what's the percentage there? That's out of how many people? So I'm going to go back to this. This was after getting the
percentage, Shane, but you don't think this number is high either way?
It depends on the percentage. If it's, again, I would need to know. That's what matters, man. If you're going to compare it to, here's how I'll put it. It should be zero, but it's not going to be zero. And so anything beyond that, you need to put it into context by knowing out of how many people this many people got sick. You know what I mean? So that number, I would need to know how many people work there. This is the thing with Amazon. Remember the news story? I believe it was coming out over the weekend, maybe late last week.
It was like 11,000 workers on the show. It was a high number.
Something like that. But here's the thing. It was lower than the national average. How many times do I need to repeat that? If they're frontline workers, if they're being forced to work in those conditions, which frankly they shouldn't be, from what I've heard, Amazon workers have described lack of protections. I'll put it that way. We've had Chris, I'm forgetting his last name, but Chris, come on the show to talk about us with this. I hear that, but those numbers are lower than the national average. So should we be indicting Amazon, or should we be thanking them for protecting those workers?
But
I don't
it's not
think
the
we should be
national
doing
average. I
either.
think you need to judge them by. But we can have this conversation later. Let's wrap. I'm sorry. I just want to say let's just put a pin in this so we can talk about this one later. Let's go to our guests.
Sure.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest for this segment and the next, Dr. Mikhail Kogan. Dr. Kogan, how are you doing this morning?
Very good.
Oh,
great to be here.
Good. Very, very glad to have you. For those listening, Dr. Kogan is the medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine. He's an associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and he is the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. That's a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Dr. Kogan, thank you again for being with us. We brought you on frequently as our guest, our go-to medical guest on issues related to the coronavirus, specifically, the medical, the biological sides of these things. We're actually bringing you on to talk about another side of this. We can get into the medical aspect of this too. But I'll start it like this. With Trump hospitalized over the weekend, Trump released on Monday. Did he actually beat COVID? What's your take there?
Well, we don't know. First of all, I think it's a little too early to say. As everybody knows by now, this disease is extremely variable. We have some people who have symptoms for weeks, if not months. Some people have very mild symptoms, and they recover in a couple of days. Of course, also everybody knows by now that he actually is in a pretty high-risk category, and so he had more chances of having prolonged illness. But, of course, compared to the rest of us, he also has not one doctor, not 2 doctors, the whole team of doctors, plus readily available section of the big hospital just for him. So, the level of care that he got, and of course, everybody also by now followed that he also received so many different treatments, that trying to figure out what actually worked in those treatments and why he got quickly better is not so easy. So, yeah.
But did he get better? I guess that's the question. From my own experience, having multiple doctors doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do the job all that much better. Yes, you have more eyes, you have more conversation and everything else, but at the same token, these guys are thinking, I would imagine to some degree similarly when they're dealing with him. They basically hit him with a cocktail of drugs and whatnot. Politically, I have to be honest, I think he's probably faking because he wants to make it look like it's not that big of a deal or it's not that bad. And
regardless of whether he's faking it or not, I think, unfortunately, the stance that this is not a big deal is extremely hurtful for the public, right? I don't think that regardless of the fact that he recovered quickly, and, again, let's put, me, right? I'm not going to talk about politics, so let's put that aside. But, the message there, it's not a big deal. Look, I'm recovered. Yeah, but for him, there's thousands of people who didn't recover, even in the last couple of days. And to sort of take it so lightheartedly is really disservice.
And to one more point on that, Trump is arguing basically that it's like the flu. Now, Facebook and Twitter took his pages down when he said that because they said it was basically what you just said, harmful. Can you explain? This is not the flu, right?
That's not a flu. You have mortality 5 to 10 times higher. You have in just 8 months or whatever we've been at it now, 9 months, we have 200 plus deaths versus flu on average. You have 20,000, maybe 30,000, maybe 40,000 deaths per year, the whole year. So, it's 5 times at least the mortality. And it's not even that. The flu is, it's it's significantly infectious, but it's not as infectious as corona. And that's one. And second, the issue is, the bigger issue is, we have certain treatments for flu. We have the vaccine that's effective every year. Okay, well, you can arguably say, how effective is it? Well, if it's effective enough that I just took it yesterday. But we don't have any FDA-approved treatments except for remdesivir for the COVID, and even remdesivir, the sort of the chance of saving life with remdesivir is pretty small. It just shortens the stay, and the benefit is at best moderate, but in reality it is mild. I can't compare them. We've talked about this, I think, in the past also, in a lot of even in my own Facebook chats, in exchange of information, I quite often come across somebody saying, "Oh, it's just like a flu." No, it's not like a flu. If you think like a flu, God help you, because if you get sick, you will realize very quickly it's totally not like a flu. Now, why he recovered so rapidly, and again, let's put that aside. But for him, it felt like a flu because he recovered in a couple of days, and but can't really make that statement publicly.
Yeah, and like we've been talking about, he's received a raft of other treatments. Is that normal? We've been painting this on the show as basically.
What's really fascinating?
Yeah, go for it.
Everybody's discussing Regeneron drug. Everybody's talking about remdesivir. But look, he's got vitamin D, which we talked about in depth. Right? We had a whole couple of 2 weeks ago. We talked about vitamin D for like significant amount of our time because of the standard study. He got zinc. That was controversial from the beginning, but a good rationale, right? He got melatonin, which is an anti-inflammatory. And then he got the famotidine, which there's a BARDA trial that was ongoing. I'm not exactly sure where that is, but that was a serious contender for being a possibly effective treatment. So he got all these drugs that if you go to any hospital, including our own hospital, you won't get any of this. So does that mean he fared better because of it? We don't know. We don't know any of it. We don't know if he would have got nothing, would he got it better? Very possible, right? So for some people, as I said, this is mild disease. So in short, they threw a cocktail at him. My personal take on this is actually quite appropriate. That's how I think about medicine. If you don't have a proven clear cure, and you have a possible solutions, you then weighing in the safety versus efficacy. If your safety is very high, are you really going to question safety of melatonin or vitamin D for a short period of time, like a short course? No, you're not going to. You would think of them as food in the territory of discussing in the course of a couple of weeks. So I think quite appropriate. Did it help him? I don't know. I think it may have. I do recommend all of those things that he took, except for famotidine, for my own patients who are either afraid of getting COVID or actually are getting COVID, and I want to give them something that I'm sure going to be safe for a short period of time.
So here's another side of this. Why isn't the medical establishment doing that itself? We're talking about the medical establishment in this case over at Walter Reed giving Trump the cocktail, like you're saying, including a cocktail that includes some pretty safe stuff, and yet vitamin D was played down for a while. Zinc has been played down. People have been cautioned against taking these things. I guess there's like a a dynamic here where the medical establishment does not seem to want to promote these either falsely as a cure or as a cure-all, that people could take staying home thinking that might alone help them to resist the virus. I can see that, but then the other side of this is, if, like you're saying, it's not going to hurt people, why aren't hospitals giving these things out willy-nilly? What's the process there?
Know.
What's the perspective?
I have no. So my response to this as a human being is infuriatingly, I don't understand that. My response as a doctor goes like this. Well, if you have an unproven treatment and none of your staff, frankly, is spent years trying to research these things and they well understand, and they have some other interest in it, like a research interest, stock interest. I don't know. Unfortunately, what happens in medicine is often, a reality where people are taking safety so high up. They say, look, it's not researched. We don't even know if it's safe for this specific situation, for this specific condition. We're not going to give it. That's one. Number two, we have an FDA approval process. There's reasons for it, right? I mean, it's not only just because we need payment structure in place. No, because there is a process by which every treatment for a specific condition passes through a certain set of criteria, right? So safety criteria, efficacy criteria, logic criteria, meaning that you have some clear underlying process by which the specific treatment you're recommending is going to work. So it has to pass all these checkpoints, and then it gets approved. The problem here, we're discussing treatments that cannot be FDA approved at all. There's just no pathway to get vitamin D approved by FDA. Why? Because it's not a drug. It's a supplement or a food. The same goes for zinc. The same goes for melatonin. So those are considered to be natural products that FDA regulates only in case there's a problem. But they actually can't just approve it for something. You would have to escalate that specific supplement to be a medical food. To be a medical food, you also have to create something else out of it. So why would you take a zinc and then create another patent formula when zinc is available everywhere? The industry is not going to do it. There's no money in it. You're not going to be able to compete with everybody else selling the same zinc for pennies versus you selling it for dollars. So there's no commercial drive to push it. There's no easy pathway to get it approved. So the rest is left sort of like, if you have a study and then you have a hospital or a group of physicians saying, look, looks good. I don't care about FDA approval. Let's do it. There has to be this kind of logic. Why it hasn't occurred more often, I don't know. But look at it this way. How often, you and I are first serious conversation about the supplements in his cocktail. I've been browsing the news since weekend, and I haven't seen any outlet saying, look, maybe those things were actually important. Everybody putting one line, oh, by the way, he took this, they're not FDA approved, and we don't know if they work, and that's it. And the whole discussion of everything else was about the drugs. And I think it's showing you sort of how we operate. And I'm critical of this. And I'm critical of this because in this cocktail, just to simply say, oh, only Regeneron works, you can't. You have no idea what actually worked. And did it work for him? Did it not work for him? I don't know. But the fact is the President of the United States took this cocktail. And the media only covering one aspect of it. And, and people who are simply following the news and they don't care about reading details of the mechanism of how Regeneron polyclonal antibody work, they may not paying attention to. They're simply going to read it and say, wait a second, if the president taking this, I'm going to start taking it too. And I think we have a due diligence to our public to say, well, let's have a serious discussion about this. Should we use this cocktail for everybody because it's safe? I don't see anybody engaging experts, engaging agencies into this conversation. Do you?
Not in this specific one. Not in this specific conversation. No, this one feels unique to me. Let's do this. Let's take a break. We're coming to the end of the segment, and it's about like a minute left, and I can't necessarily ask a question at that time frame. This is Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine at George Washington University, and Founder and Executive Director of the AIM Health Institute. We will be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is, I'm here with my co-host. I'm sorry. Wow. Foible that when I try to go back and recover. I'm coming to you from the capital of the world, Washington, D.C. Dr. Kogan, and we're here joined with Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine at George Washington University, and Founder and Executive Director of the AIM Health Institute. Dr. Kogan, I don't accept, because I am cynical. I've gotten that way just by, reviewing and studying politics for these years. I don't necessarily accept that Donald Trump is healthy. I don't take him at his word. Donald Trump lies as easily as breathing. And if in this very specific moment, this is the man that said this virus is just as, just like the flu. And just to put an emphasis on it, the annual flu toll has ranged between 12,000 and 61,000 since 2010. So, no relation. They have 200,000 people dead. It's not even close. Like you said, it's 4 or 5 to 1. What I want to ask is about a VIP syndrome, meaning those doctors who came out there. I don't know if you saw the testimony. It looked like they were being deceptive. And when you would ask them questions about the oxygen or ask them about his health and everything else, they didn't seem to want to give that particular information. And I thought to myself, what pressure is being brought to bear on this medical institution and its staff with the President of the United States in their care and a president that clearly does not want to be there? What is it like behind the scenes on something like that? And when doctors are faced with dealing with somebody who's a very important person, at least in our context, do they behave differently? Meaning from the standpoint of the way they treat them, from the way the drugs that they give, and even whether they would let them out early if it was against, they don't have a choice about that, of course. If he wants to leave, he can leave. But I guess I'm getting to this notion that how do the doctors behave when they're dealing with somebody who is not just a regular person?
Well, was there any misrepresentation of things, or were they just simply trying to position giving less information? I don't think anybody was trying to license.
Dr. Kogan, real quickly, I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you. I think you might have moved to speakerphone. It is quite a bit harder to hear you. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you can switch back to the headset and get back into it. Thank you. That's 100% better. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. I'm not sure what happened with my piece. So, I don't know. I don't think there was any specific sort of points of trying to mislead the public. I think the communication could have been different, but, this is exactly the point, sort of how much information do you communicate? Because don't forget, after all, president or no president, he is a person. And the person has a right to sort of say, look, there's certain things I don't want to tell you. And, because when you're sick, your priority is to get better. So I'm not actually critiquing medical team response. You could argue till cows come home as to sort of that they should have released more details and all that. In reality, we don't actually know what went there. the level of communication by medical team, of course, was screened, and, they were supposed to say what they were supposed to say. So, I mean, I can only imagine being put in their shoes and figure out how to respond. We are supposed to, quote unquote, right, cynically supposed to act similarly, whether our patient is the president of the United States or not. But in reality, of course, everybody knows that that's not what happens. The VIPs do get preferential treatment and everything in between. And in reality, my main critique here is that, the communication about the treatments could have been more laid out, in my opinion. So, they could have described as to why each piece of treatment in their mind was applied. And then and they could have made it actually, again, it's not a critique, it's an attempt to say what should have been done better so that the public would benefit from it bigger, right?
Good point.
And
Very good point. Exceptional point. I love that. You're right. Because if you're going to give that information out like that, and you're dealing with the president, why did you do this? Like, why did you use this drug? Right. Why did you use that drug? And at the very least, the other people around the world could, get out there. Perfect. I love that.
And they left it out. They left it out for the media to interpret. And unfortunately, what we were just talking about, what transpired is kind of a totally skewed way of some outlets were reviewing. Of course, Regeneron, like their stock would shoot up like over the weekend dramatically. So like you can't. You really have to provide the details. I mean, nobody knows whether Regeneron is effective. Is it? I mean, the trial is ongoing. Will it be effective? We don't know. So at the very minimum, I think the communication could have been that, look, we're doing this because we decided, we talked to the Regeneron, this is their current data, this is why I decided. Instead it all was surrounded by this sense of secrecy. And I understand why. I mean, I'm sure they had a red tape and they had to say what they had to say. So, but, you also have to give the team a credit, right? I mean, look, he's recovered, and he's recovered with pre-existing conditions rapidly. Do I believe this is all a political game? No, I don't believe that. I think that's far-fetched thinking.
Why the red tape? You brought that up. Why the secrecy? Why would they want to keep that information at bay?
Well, I mean, think of it this way. I'm sure that they are informed what to say and what not to say. There's a political campaign upcoming, and I don't know how their speech is influenced. I don't even know, like, do you know, for example, when the president's personal doctor communicates to the public, is there a specific way of communication? Is there a specific amount of information that's typically to give? I don't even know that. I mean, it's
just that kind of thing. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
I get it. Dr. Kogan, I actually wanted to come back. There's a kind of an interesting conversation. We continued in a forum on the other side of the break, but you've been bringing up this is not politics. This is more like institutional politics or something like that. We've had you on the show before to talk about the medical establishment, whether it's healthcare or we even brought up, I think, the rate of technological growth. I guess there are a couple of different sides of this, but here's where I'm going to go. But how expensive are these drugs to produce? Even the slightly quirkier or more esoteric ones that people wouldn't be familiar with. Dexamethasone is a very common steroid, so I'm not gonna put that in that list. But the plasma antibody treatment, the infusion of antibodies, that's a little bit, people are less familiar with it. Obviously, remdesivir, that's new as far as I can tell. Please correct me if I'm wrong. How expensive are those drugs to produce? It seems to me like if they're relatively cheap to produce and yet they're expensive, or they're being, kept from the public, or whatever form that takes, what's the process there like? Is this just profits going into the pockets of the corporations that own the patents on these things, or what is that, Dr. Kogan?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. The remdesivir price, we know it's thousands and thousands of dollars just for a few doses. It's not an easy to produce drug for sure. The Regeneron drug will be not easy to produce. So, I mean, I'm sure that significant proportion of this price is justified, but, are they making, thousands of dollars on each treatment protocol? I don't know. I think this is the general problem with big pharma, that you never kind of know which players are really trying to do good service. And, I'm guessing is they never actually sort of going to broke, right? So they're always going to plan in a way that they're going to make money out of this. And more importantly, they know the volume. The volume here could be potentially huge. So the way that things are going, right, if the whole country is going to get infected slowly, it means that they're going to have millions of doses of this drug to be distributed. And of course, that's a lot of money, even if their margin is small. And that's probably why all of the conversation is surrounded around the drugs, not around the zinc, which costs, a penny a day. So, again, that's another thing. It would have been probably good for all of us to have an expert over the weekend in link with government to say, this is why we're doing this, and this is what we think is going to happen. But again, in hindsight, it's easy to critique. And of course, that there are multiple outlets that have provided that information to the public to some extent.
Dr. Kogan, I want to get into the disease or the virus structure itself, meaning any update on the information regarding it. Have there been any changes in regards to the information that we have on how that virus propagates, or even not just propagate itself, the viral structure itself? When I think you were here before, we were talking about some of the abnormalities in it in regards to the way it was kind of structured when they look down into it and try to get an idea of how it intersects with the body and so forth, and why it's so destructive, and even why there are secondary symptoms like the inflammation symptoms that comes along with the virus itself. Do we know anything else about that?
So let me give you one interesting thing, because I was just sort of looking this up last Friday. So we're all familiar by now that a pretty significant proportion of people lose smell right before or during the onset of symptoms. And it was kind of a mystery as to why that was happening until pretty recent. And the thinking was that somehow nervous system gets infected, and there's a cutoff of information between you smelling a substance and the brain interpreting it. Turned out that there are ACE receptors on the supportive tissue around the olfactory nerves, around the nerve that smells. And when those cells that get infected with virus, turns out that there is some kind of a miscommunication that occurs. So the nerve itself is not damaged, thank God. So actually, that's why people say that after disease goes away, sense of smell comes back. But that's a pretty unique effect. Like, I have not heard of any other viral infection doing something like this. So you see, we're learning gradually that this virus is extremely unusual, and not only in the fact that it creates systemic inflammation, there are other viruses that do that, but it seems to impact different tissues differently. And I'm sure we're going to learn gradually more and more information. So I think what we should do is we should just get in the habit of doing a little update like this every time. What do you think?
I agree with you, 1,000%, because it's fascinating. Like, when you get into even that, like you said, it's a weird quirk in regards to that very specific virus. So, we're going to have you back so we can continuously talk about this very specific topic and any updates on this particular virus. And we're going to drag you into a little bit of politics also. So I want to thank Dr. Mikhail Kogan for coming on. He's medical director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We're coming to the end of an hour, so let's close it out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, literally at this point, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's get to headlines. In the news, Joe Biden spoke Tuesday afternoon overlooking the battlefield where Union soldiers tilted the tide in the Civil War, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I think we have a clip for this. Let's play the clip.
Today, once again, we are a house divided. But that, my friends, can no longer be. We are facing too many crises. We have too much work to do. We have too bright a future to have it shipwrecked on the shoals of anger and hate and division. You don't have to agree with me on everything, or even on most things, to see that we're experiencing today is neither good nor normal. I made the decision to run for president after Charlottesville. Close your eyes and remember what you saw. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and the KKK coming out of the fields with torches lighted, veins bulging, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. It was hate on the march, in the open, in America. Hate never goes away. It only hides. And when it's given oxygen, when it's given an opportunity to spread, when it's treated as normal and acceptable behavior, we've opened a door in this country that we must move quickly to close. 210,000 Americans dead, and the number's climbing. It's estimated that nearly another 210,000 Americans could lose their lives by the end of the year. Enough. No more. Let's just set partisanship aside. Let's end the politics and follow the science. Wearing a mask is not a political statement. It's a scientific recommendation.
I can't disagree with Joe Biden there. Wearing a mask is not a political statement. Agreed. And yet, unfortunately, it is. Because value is not absolute. And in this particular situation, people decide that not wearing it is more important. Shane, that's your Vice President Joe Biden.
Hey, that is, yeah, former Vice President Joe Biden, potentially soon to be President Joe Biden, and hopefully not, but we'll see. Might be soon deceased and replaced by Kamala Harris, just based on the way things are going. But that's, a bit morbid anyway.
Speech, though? What do you think about the speech?
Like I said, I think he's capitalizing on the gains that he's made purely through Trump's losses. And I think he'll continue to do that. Now, the point that people are making about that speech is that he didn't reference Trump in it. That is a pretty sharp demarcation. It's a dividing line. Trump references Biden pretty frequently. Trump is a vociferous critic of the left. Biden, he criticizes the right too, but I think he's trying to pivot and make him trying to sort of push Trump out of the center of attention show himself as a statesman. You know what I mean? Show himself as a statesman in some capacity who's unifying, all that stuff.
He's also trying
to do that
from Trump, as if I am going to be the president and this guy is going to walk. I mean, it's a tactic that they use, even if you look back at, when Joe Biden started running in the primaries, and you notice he was running in the race, but really he wasn't attacking. He wasn't talking about anybody. He was just there because he was assumed to be the person who's going to win it. It was only when he got to the point where he was losing that he started engaging in this kind of back and forth. But up to that point, he was detached. Clinton, same thing. When Clinton got to the point where she says this race is over with, she stopped representing her opponent and she just starts talking about herself. Biden, if this is going to be something that they're going forward with, like we have this so in the lock that we don't even have to reference the president of the United States. That's going to be amazing. I have to see how that goes. So,
I think it's just. I just want to point. I think it's disgusting that he was doing this on Gettysburg. I mean, the politics there, of course, is obvious.
Yeah.
He's trying to echo Lincoln, but he's not Lincoln. He's a far cry. He's a far cry from Lincoln. And so on that level, just as an American, I find that pretty shameful. But I've got to give him the coup in terms of optics.
Lincoln freed the slaves, and Joe Biden put a ton of blacks in prison. It's a disgusting optic. I'm sorry. The lying about civil rights. It is a disgusting optic. I hate it. Part and parcel to the reason why I find Joe Biden so disgusting and a grotesque figure in this kind of situation. I mean, he is standing on Gettysburg of the Civil War and is attacking the president. Fair enough. But you have things in your history, the Biden crime bill and stuff like that, that grates when they do stuff like this, these optics. I don't like it. But let's keep going. A piece of internet legislation, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, is under threat by President Donald Trump. At its core, the law provides immunity for websites, publishers from third-party content. Section 230 says the internet platform that hosts third-party content such as tweets on Twitter, posts on Facebook, photos on Instagram, reviews on Yelp, news outlet reader comments, and in case you've missed it, tweets. Those internet platforms are not liable for what those third parties post, with few exceptions. This allows websites driven by user-generated content to exist. Without this law, a Yelp reviewer could post something defamatory about a business, and the business could be sued, and the business could sue Yelp for libel. With Section 230, the business could only sue the reviewer for libel, not Yelp. It's vitally important. Somebody posts something on Twitter about somebody else, you can't sue Twitter. You have to sue the individual. In advance of Vice President Pence and Senator Kamala Harris's debate tonight, Pence's team has agreed to allow a plexiglass divider for his side of the stage, according to the Commission on Presidential Debates. The concession came after Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, told Washington Post earlier Tuesday that their team did not view plexiglass dividers as medically necessary, given that the two debaters will be more than 12 feet apart. This comes as Trump's aide Stephen Miller tested positive for coronavirus. He is married to one of Pence's top staffers, Katie Miller, who had traveled to Salt Lake City to help Vice President, potentially jeopardizing her involvement in the event. She has previously been infected with the coronavirus, and it's not clear what effect her husband's diagnosis will have on Pence's entourage. The University of Utah, the site of the debate, requires a 14-day self-quarantine for anyone exposed to someone with COVID-19. Later on Tuesday, Hurricane Delta, the Category 4 hurricane on the 5-step Saif-Simpson scale, was packing maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, down from 145 miles per hour earlier in the evening. That's according to the United States Hurricane Center, NHC. Mexicans formed long lines at supermarkets near Cancun on Tuesday to stock up in preparation of a hit overnight from powerful Hurricane Delta, which weakened slightly as it bore down on the Caribbean resort and its famous shoreline. Delta is forecast to weaken and linger over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula before strengthening again in the Gulf of Mexico, where oil companies were bracing for impact when installations and port closed. Officials ordered evacuations of Cancun Hotel Zone and other coastal areas and opened the city's convention center as shelter. A new nationwide poll shows that 1 in every 4 rural households have been unable to get medical care for serious problems. Well, among the households that had trouble getting care, more than half reported that a family member experienced negative health consequences as a result. The poll was conducted by NPR, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public School, and the Robert Wood Johnson Fund. Shane, I find this to be a national disgrace. Poverty in general is a national disgrace. It should be something that your nation is embarrassed by. And yet, not so much. Now, I say that, and I understand that, again, value is not absolute. I take that from my standpoint to this particular reality space. And being here, nobody asked to be here. And you have a world full of resources. And you have a world full of people with technological acumen to be able to use those resources to provide food, clothing, shelter, clean water, clean air for each and every person. And I hate to point out, but each and every one of those things are absolutely necessary for a person to be whole. And if those things are not there, that person will not be whole and you will get chaos. What do you think about this? I understand from your standpoint, I think you might say a technological solution. I agree with you. Technology is the way out in this.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what? That's my normal take. That's my default take. I say that because I have another kind of weirder take that's a little bit hard to talk about. I think we need an institutional revival. I think we put it like this: if our society has all these superstructures built on top of it, built within it to sustain it, political institutions, governmental institutions, even corporations, you can view those as institutions. What we need is an art and a science of understanding and fixing our institutions. I'm working on this stuff. I have friends who are working on this stuff. Nobody did, as far as I can tell. Very few people are talking about it in these terms. We need to think about it almost like programmers think about code in an application they're writing. How do our institutions work? What are the behaviors? What are the connections between the key players? There's so much stuff here, and I get it's a little bit formal and kind of esoteric, but that's in my
Shane,
my opinion.
That's not weird.
If we want a technological revival, we need that first. That's going to be part of the segue into that real growth period that we could get into.
Yes, agreed. That's not weird. That's flat fact true. I mean, that should be like infinitely apparent at this point. Because, you're right. When you look at our structures in our society, this is propagating this stuff. But I would just say before that is a conceptual change. It has to be. Like, until you get to this point where people value other human beings more than they value profit, and that's a conceptual change. It is hard to get to that point. Meaning, from my perspective of things, it all collapses. Now, when it collapses, you can make an argument that the structures that you're talking about building need to be there so society will have something to cling to as it collapses. It always drags stuff along with it from the past, of course. But whether you're talking about a Richard Wolff idea or whether you're talking about your idea in the sense of saying, look, when this needs to change fundamentally and thoroughly and all the way through, and we need to think about how people engage with one another first and foremost. Because ultimately what we're talking about is human connections and the way human beings behave in a system. And human beings don't necessarily like to admit that who they are and basically how they behave, how they act, how they operate are part and parcel to the environment to which they find themselves. They like to think of themselves as thinking beings. And when I say no, you're robots with an aspect of you that's, something else. They don't like that. Some
we need to individuate ourselves.
I'm doing it all myself. And that's not necessarily
I see it as a process.
True. Go for it.
We need to individuate ourselves. Part of the process of becoming being a part of a better society, but fundamentally the process of being a better human, I think, is you need to individuate yourself. You need to become literally individual in a sort of philosophical sense, where you are reconciled with your own beliefs, where you can stand as a constituent of society, but where you can also view it reflectively and independently. And I think as you gain that individuation, as you individuate yourself, I'm not going to repeat that word one more time, but as you become more independent in that sense, then you kind of gain, it's like the thin edge of the wedge that lets you gain that degree of self-consciousnness, that degree of emotional and intellectual continence that lets you hold your thoughts together. That's a spiritual process, but I think we need that to revitalize our society.
That spiritual process doesn't take place in a hellscape. It just doesn't. Like, this stuff is emergent. Like, when you tell people, for example, and you get people to the point where their income pops up, where they have the things that they need. It doesn't have to be extravagant, but they have the things that they need. Climate change becomes one of the things they care about. Why? They want a planet there because their life is okay. When you look at people who are talking about drugs or suicide or all of these other things, and people get to the point of life is difficult. But if life wasn't difficult, this notion of hell and all of this other stuff in heaven, the world would be your heaven. It's not perfect, no. But the vagaries and the things like that we have today, I'm making the point that in order for a person to be that whole spiritual person that you were talking about, it requires a society that would allow that person to be that way. It's not entirely individual. There's no such thing as just you. Any part of you is interacting with some part of society, and any idea or belief and everything else had to some part, originated, came from, was cobbled together by some other aspect of society. I think we're in agreement in regards to what needs to take place. The question is always, of course, how. But those are your headlines. You are indeed listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's do this. Let's take a break. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And you're also going to be soon listening to our guest for this segment, Chuck Zlatkin. He's the legislative and political director for the New York Metro Area Postal Union. It's APWU, for those looking for the sign there. Chuck, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Thank you for having me back to update what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're just going to start right there. We were talking about the USPS a while back, a bit over a month ago. This was top of the news, top of the headlines all over the place. That, of course, was when it was the center of the stage, at the center of the stage in the political controversy, in the wider political controversy that is our electoral cycle in 2020. But that kind of fell out of the news. We wanted to bring you back on to give us an update. What's been going on? Chuck, what's been going on with USPS recently?
Okay, well, there were 11 lawsuits brought against a combination of the USPS, the Postmaster General, President Trump on these changes that basically slowed down the mail, and people were afraid of the impact that it was going to have on the November elections. So of the 11 lawsuits, there have been judgments on 5 of them so far. All of them have ruled against the Postal Service in the sense that they said they had to roll back these changes. And a number of them, there have been appeals by the Postal Service trying to work things out. They've lost all of them. So in terms of the rulings on this issue and supposedly what the Postal Service has to do, is it looks good for the November 3rd elections, because most of these lawsuits have banned any changes. They have to go back to the way it was, and they can't initiate any new changes till after November 6th. I guess they want to have a few days, for late ballots or something like that. So on that basis, the actions by the state attorney generals, governors all around the country, people rising up and saying, wait a minute now, we have to be sure that people don't have to choose between voting and their health. So the rulings, and at least what we were able to monitor, and we do that in the unions and the workers around the country, is seeing what the Postal Service is actually instituting these changes and monitoring the facts. So I feel pretty confident that the Postal Service is going to be able to handle the ballots on their end fine, either getting their ballots and people returning them if people are reasonable and don't wait till the last second. So I think the courts have ruled, and it's all been losses for the Joy and his administration of the Post Office. So that's a positive sign. Again, we also watch in terms of the funding, which we're always aware of it because of the fact that the Postal Service has been hurt by the pandemic and has been trying to get some kinds of emergency funds to get through this period. So recently, the Heroes 2.2 Act, which was passed again by the Democratic House, and that included the same language basically as the other legislation calling for $25 billion in emergency aid for the Postal Service. But that's not is going anywhere. But then we all heard, the news, a day or two ago that supposedly Pelosi and Mnuchin were in serious negotiations for some kind of a relief package, and then the president said, no, that's not going to happen. So again, we're aware, we're monitoring that to see what's happening, and again, this fall seems to have become an issue once again in the presidential election, because as we know, Trump, with his task force in 2019 and the Office of Management Budget, has pretty clearly, come out and calling for privatization of the Postal Service, called the Postal Service, a joke, a catastrophe, attacking the postal workers at a time when most people, honored them for the efforts they've made during the pandemic. So that's a concern. And then we have, the New York Times came out with a story the other day about Robert Duncan, who's the chair of the Postal Board of Governors and an active Trump appointee, and is involved with his own organization, American Crossroads, which has raised, millions of dollars and supporting, Republicans and races. Obviously, the conflict of interest. So I guess there has to be, more legislation to deal with that. But so Trump is pretty clear. And then recently, Biden came out with statements where he's committing to keeping a public post office, that he's against privatization, that his appointments to the Postal Board of Governors will be reflective of people who care about the Postal Service, and he's committed to, collective bargaining for postal workers. So he's clearly come out on what side he's on. And of course, as we've talked before, I don't necessarily believe any promises that elected officials make, because we've seen the bipartisan aspect to this. But it's pretty clear-cut in this election that the people who are supporting, at least on paper, a public postal service, and the ones who still favor privatizing it, it's pretty, clear-cut in that aspect. But I would think that for the election, we're okay. My concern is what happens after November 3rd. People still have to get their medicines. People still have to get important papers and packages. And it appears that DeJoy, who, again, if one more person comes up to me and says, you got to vote, that's how you'll get the postmaster out. No, the postmaster is appointed by the Postal Board of Governors. He serves at their pleasure. Right now, there are 6 boards of governors, 6 governors, all appointed by Trump. One of them's term is up in December. They're supposed to have, Democrats and Republicans. And there are 9 members when it's full. Right now, there are 6. There are 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and one of the Democrats' term is ending. So whoever the president is, if Trump tries to rush these things through before the election, he's supposed to appoint the Democrat members. And if it's a 5-4 split, the 5 goes with who the president is. If it's a Republican, you have 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. So we have to, watch that carefully. Even though the fact that someone is a Democrat doesn't mean that they're not in favor of privatization, and not exactly someone who's looking out for the best interest of the the people. So even though we're not at the top of the news cycle, it's still an important issue. It's something that's being decided now. But I would say that I'm confident that with all of this focus on this and the court rulings, that if people, want to vote through the mail, that they're safe to do it. I would say don't wait till the last day, but I'm pretty confident that the Postal Service will be able to handle this. My concern is what happens after the election. What kind of a Postal Service will we have then?
Chuck, if you guys don't get the $25 billion, basically the money that the House of Representatives has appropriated, and look, to me, you have to pay for your services. If I wanted to have cable, I have to pay for that. If the country wants mail, you got to pay for that. It shouldn't be this kind of black mark, and the Postal Service shouldn't have to come begging for cash in the way that they've structured this. If you guys don't get the money, what happens to the Postal Service, or what will take place in regards to the USPS?
Well, as I said to you in the past, I don't want to look at that, but the possibility. But if at this point, if they don't get the funds, and then you can't spend money that you don't have, and you can't borrow money that you're not entitled to borrow. At that point, I guess the postal, who's ever running the Postal Service at that time, will have to just start cutting services, cutting funds, and once that happens, then, Postal Service is ended, because the reason that the Postal Service and postal workers have such a high rating among the American people is because they do the job. People rely on the post office. They can trust the post office that it's going to do the work. Once the Postal Service stops delivering for people and isn't there for people, then people's, respect for the Postal Service is going to diminish. And then I guess maybe that's what DeJoy was hoping to accomplish by slowing the mail, knowing that would hurt that trust between the American people and the post office, making it easy to private. Can't see how it's even possible to allow this to happen because of the important things that people depend upon, but also there's a whole part of the economy that's based on the Postal Service and mailings and all of that stuff that represents, billions and billions of dollars and many employees. It would really be damaging to the economy to have this happen, besides damaging to the individuals who depend upon it. How anybody who is reaching out to support the American people can be against the Postal Service, I don't know. So I don't know if that's answered your question, Jamal, but it's pretty frightening to think what would happen if they allow, be like, what if they allow the roads to go, or traffic lights not to be repaired, or hospitals to close? I mean, it's in the same area of that. So I'm so hopeful that the pressure from the American people will be dealt with, and enough people, in close elections who are supporting of the Postal Service. But it shouldn't have even gotten to this point, but it has, so we have to deal with it.
It is unfortunate that it got to this point. You guys have been listening to, and by the way, Chuck, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I mean, we always enjoy you coming on because you give us the straight, what they call it, straight dope about what's going on with our Postal Service. And like you said, it's a beloved institution. The NHS, I don't know if you were around for this. Well, of course you were around for this, but they did a salute to their NHS, the UK, in the Olympics. That's how much they loved that state institution. And, I was putting it in the chat. We love institutions that work. Social Security, Medicare, the Postal Service. All of those things are high marks because they do the job that the country needs them to do. So, Chuck, I want to thank you for coming on. That's Chuck Zalakin, Legislative and Political Director of the New York Metro Area Postal Service. And we are going to take a break. My name is Jamarl Thomas, my co-host, Shane Stranahan. You guys are listening to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik, and we will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political
no guest yet
news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky,
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. There have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunday, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usually flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in.
No guest.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Great interview with Chuck. The point he brought up right at the end is a little bit easy to overlook. But people talk about America's decaying infrastructure, and usually we're talking about the physical infrastructure. But that applies to institutions too. That applies to the USPS. I kind of need to go back over the history, and I want to get somebody on who disagrees, because so far we've only heard this one side of it. I still haven't heard the other side of it, and I know that there would be one. My guess is it would be a very interesting conversation, argument probably, with whomever we would bring on to talk about that. But if we can, that'd be an interesting one. But from what Chuck was saying, USPS has long been pushed back, long been suppressed effectively. Privatization attempts, the massive pre-funding there, that's all suppressive. And that's both a symptom and a cause. It's a feedback cycle for a declining political system. Just on that sort of wide, abstract, broad brush level, it's tantamount to the decaying roads, the decaying bridges, the problems that are, readily apparent to anybody who drives around. It's on that level. Jamarl.
But the political system doesn't, philosophically, they should care about those things. Philosophically, we come together with this notion that we have a society and that people go into government with the idea of doing what's best for their society. The catch becomes, what does the term society mean? And is it possible that there is a secondary society of people who are very, very wealthy, who don't drive on those roads that are broken, who don't engage in those stores that are dilapidated or send their kids to schools that are dilapidated, that they have an entirely different world. And because they have an entirely different world, that other world that many people inhabit, they don't engage with. So whereas you would want to have a government that does that, what you end up with is a government that is handsomely paid, that is full of people who are rich and wealthy, some of which are oligarchs. And the people that you see on television are also the shiny, sparkling people, talking heads, also handsomely paid. Everybody that gives you news and information, for the most part, are millionaires. The people in your government that make those laws, for the most part, are millionaires. The people who pay them are millionaires, businesses, corporations, dumping all of these money in the PACs and everything else. Why would you get a different political system, and why would you get a different outcome? Why would a small crust of the population that has done what they needed to do to get to that point, or was basically born into it like Trump, why would they care? What is the political philosophy that they need to adhere to that makes them care? And I'm saying nothing. This reality is hard. And part of that is recognizing that there are different points of view. There are people who can stand in their own, like Shane said, and have a fully formed political ideology, like Shane said, and turn around and say, I'm going to kick that poor guy. I'm teasing you, Shane, the individuatedness thing. But you can come to the same conclusion as an individual that I don't care about anybody else and be perfectly content in that conclusion. The universe will not care one iota, nor would it punish that individual for doing so. That's your world. If there's some point where we get to a better sense of consciousness, you have to have less of those people in order to get those roads fixed, in order to have institutions like the post office that are not under attack, and in order to, have a world that we can use technology to get rid of many of these issues that we deal with on a daily basis. And I got to be honest, I don't quite know how to get there from here. We can't even get people to support Medicare for all. We can't even get people to just say, hey, poverty is a fail. Let's get rid of it. However you need to get rid of it. We can't even do that. So, it's like, I feel you, Shane. I would love for a society that paid attention to those things. But the fact of the matter is you have a very explicit code, script, software, if you want to call it. This is maximize your profit. And when people do, especially to the tune of billions, they tend to want society to conform around them. I picked on you, Shane, so I want you to comment on that first.
Now let's talk about that at 9:45. We've got our guest on.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you didn't pick on me because you misunderstood me.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I misunderstood. I don't want to straw man. I don't want to do that. I want to hit the argument.
I'm not going to blame you.
So I'm sorry if I did.
This is a little bit. It's a little bit too nuanced for this segment. And again, we do have our guest on, Bradley Blankenship. He's a Prague-based American journalist, political analyst, and freelance reporter. His columns can be found on RT and CGTN.com. Bradley, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Doing good. Hey, guys. How you guys doing?
Good. Yeah, thank you for being with us. All right. We're talking about a couple of things today. Let's start here. You're arguing, basically, that social media should do more. I'm going to put that in. I don't want to misrepresent you, but that they should be doing more to contain the infodemic, a different kind of pandemic, this one having to do with information and the spread of false information online. Could you please make your case on that, Bradley?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, it's funny, the day that my column was published, actually, Donald Trump, another one of his tweets were censored, the one where he talked about the flu being more dangerous than the coronavirus. So basically, the argument that I put forward was based on a Cornell University study that analyzed 38 million English language articles, and they found that the president was directly responsible for 38% of that misinformation around the virus, and that was mostly around miracle cures. And we know, looking over the months, that there's been, in local media across the country, people who have died taking different miracle cures that the president was touting, for example, hydrochloroquine, and people were taking some kind of chemicals that sounded like that, for example, the fish tank cleaner, and it was apparently selling for hundreds of dollars on eBay for some time. So there was a local media story, I think in Arizona in March, of a woman, her husband died and she was in critical care for taking something that she had heard from the president. So we already know that this has caused harm. And then I had written a column in April talking about this. And of course, we see 5 months later, hundreds of thousands of Americans are dead. And people are resisting even just the most basic thing, which is wearing masks. And this is all attributable to the president. Like, leaders have such a crucial role in behavioral modeling. For example, in 1985, Fidel Castro quit smoking cigars. And he did that not only because the dangers of secondhand smoke came out, he was trying to protect himself from lung cancer and those immediately around him, but also because he knew if he was on television or on radio or some public appearance smoking a cigar, people would be more likely to do that. So that was his dedication to the Cuban people. And certainly I think Americans, especially, who have such a negative view of somebody like Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro, should at least hold the president of the United States to a higher standard. So I think social media definitely has a role.
What do you think the role is? I think that, how far should that go? Just I'm trying to nail down where you're going and how far you want to go with this. Meaning, what do you think social media's role should be?
I mean, we people are always talking about this along free speech lines, but we already know that, for example, you're not allowed to say bomb in an airport, you're not allowed to say fire in a movie theater. So there's limits to this based on public safety. When the president's going in saying stupid things that are getting people killed. And we know that this is the case. If you look at the Trump rallies, people have died connected to this. For example, Herman Cain. I mean, Trump said virtually nobody's affected by this. And then former presidential candidate Herman Cain is probably like screaming in hell somewhere after this happened. So I think that it should be limiting, like identifying when people say things like the president. Twitter flagged one of his tweets yesterday where he's talking about the flu. But just as they contact traced with the pandemic, with the disease itself, social media has total capability to contact trace misinformation and get rid of it at its source. They should flag all of these articles that are saying false information. And if different outlets make a habit of this, they should be banned from their platforms. Like, I understand this is definitely a handout of authoritarian power to social media. And of course, they have a huge, widespread power. I recommend reading Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, where she talks about this in depth, but not really to go into it here. I think that we are facing such a dangerous situation that this is warranted. I mean, it's a temporary measure, sure, but we're talking about thousands of people that are being put at risk.
Something tells me that these temporary measures are not going to be so temporary for very long. I mean, and that they're not going to be applied in the way that you would want them to. This is the fundamental sort of conservative take on government, as far as I can tell, and I'm going to levy it here. If you give governments through social media the power to administer public opinion, then you're giving them a tool that they're going to use against everybody. And if you give them more tools, they're going to get more powerful. As they get more powerful, they're going to be increasingly detached from what any individual citizen, any individual person in the society can handle, can grasp, can control, frankly. It seems like a sort of self-perpetuating feedback loop of authoritarianism. Why do you think that wouldn't happen, Bradley?
Well, in this case, it would be, private companies pushing back against the government. And I think that the solution to this is to have the government step in and regulate these companies. I mean, companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook are totally unregulated. In fact, their technology is so far beyond what the government can even fathom. In fact, like, the government has been jealous of a lot of these programs. And Google was working directly with the CIA, the NSA, and various government agencies to actually get off the ground. In fact, Google Maps was originally a CIA project that they were using. So, I mean, I think that's definitely something to consider. But I think the role of government here to regulate these companies down the road, like, I think now the public health concern here is so vast that these companies do have a serious legitimate interest in the interest of public health to crack down on this. And if people think it's an infringement on freedom of speech, I think those people can go to hell, because we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives being put at risk. I think we all want this pandemic to be over, and it's not going to be over if people can't even adhere to basic guidelines based on misinformation. But down the road, yeah, we need a serious conversation about how much power these companies can have. In the United States, it is totally the Wild West for data collection. In Europe, we have like GDPR, and some countries want to go further. They want to do a data tax. The bloc is talking about it. China actually has the strictest data use policy in the world by far. And the United States needs to step up. I mean, there's states like California that are implementing harsher things, but we need a government-wide thing. I think actually now the government, I think maybe even today, they're accusing Facebook, Google, and Twitter of all working in monopolistic, anti-competitive practices. But in the short term, we need to deal with the public health crisis. This is the thing that's most immediate to people's lives.
Let's do this. Let's go into a break. We're joined by Bradley Blankenship. He is a Prague-based American journalist, a political analyst, and a freelance reporter. His columns can be found on RT and CGTN.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back with Bradley on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Deshaun, What do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Bradley Blankenship, Prague-based American journalist, political analyst, and freelance reporter, whose column can be found at RT and CGTN.com. Bradley, how far? And are you being specific in regards to Trump that you believe that they should block or do more for his, or are you talking about on social media in general when something is harmful? I'm trying to gauge where you are, because he's the president of the United States.
Well, I think absolutely, and I think specifically now it should be Trump. I mean, he is the epicenter. The White House is now an epicenter of coronavirus in the Washington D.C. area, but it's also the epicenter of the infodemic across the world.
But
I want to talk a little bit more.
Well, just one point real quick. But should you get rid of, I guess my issue here is kind of Shane's issue. That basically, from my standpoint, tech companies are already working hand in glove with government. They would get rid of sites like Telesur. They would get rid of sites like Press TV. They would get rid of people who they don't particularly like their political opinions and objectives. And so you could have somebody telling the truth on something. Let's say, for example, the Syrian weapon stuff. Let's say the OPCW stuff. The leaks. And you could have a social media company say, well, that's not the report that was put out. And so we are going to deprioritize, or we're going to put a little sticker on this saying this is not true. My issue here is the notion of truth. I understand. Look, Donald Trump is a shield, and I get it. He is an easy target to say this guy lies flagrantly. And I even think I might agree with you when it's, you can't yell fire, and you can't tell people that bleach is going to be a cure. You can't tell people that syphilis doesn't, it's not real. So I get it. Don't misunderstand me. I get the problem, and I get the conflict here of, at which point are you silencing somebody? And at which point are you protecting the public? And where's that line, and how do you gracefully dance between the two? So I get it. I do get it. But I guess my problem here is it's not going to be used for just Trump. And the things that people consider to be truth may not actually be true. I mean, the Russiagate stuff for nonsense. I have a problem with this overreach on this. So do you understand what I'm getting at in regards to this kind of graceful step between the two? And anything that you do for Trump is invariably going to get hit with, other people are going to get hit with stuff that they're saying that is true, that these places are going to be putting stickers on and saying not true.
Yeah. So I think the first thing with that is that you can see how tentative social media has been in censoring Trump, even slightly. And it's not like they take his tweets down or his posts down; they keep them there in the public interest, and you can see that there.
Well, Facebook did take it down, but Twitter kept it up. Twitter kept it up for public interest, but Facebook did take it down, as far as I know.
Okay. And then as far as the other one, that point, I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe one day that'll happen, but I think that should be for the public to litigate after we regulate these companies. And I would go further to say that the fact that there is so much, for example, you mentioned Syria, the fact that there is so many people that are aware of the OPCW report, and there is so many people who are against the U.S. interference in Syria, and there is so many people that are keeping up with what's going on in Belarus, and the fact that there are so many people who are against intervention in Venezuela. And there was always people like that. But what the social media does, it profits off of political polarization. And not only that, it goes a step farther, the way that these companies work, using people's data to actually nudge behavior and corral you even further into your echo bubble or your echo chamber. So I would actually say that a lot of the reason why there is this disconnection and polarization of what is facts is actually because of social media. And it's actually not in their interest right now, as far as their profit, to ban websites like Telesur or Press TV or RT, Sputnik, to go down the line, unless there is significant pressure from the government. But they're certainly not going to do that themselves. They make a lot of money from this stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they would. I'll put it like this. I lived out in the Bay Area at one point. While I was there, I heard venture capitalists talking about how big tech companies, including Google, including Twitter, are afraid of antitrust lawsuits. And because they're afraid of antitrust lawsuits, they're basically going along with what the government wants them to do, through pressure, by hook and by crook. But after a period of time, they do what the government wants them to do. You're talking about social media companies. You're putting it on social media companies. But the big pressure here to control the public's opinion, access to information, is coming from the government. Fundamentally, you're talking about social media. That's if you look at it literally, that's just society. This is just technology mediating society's conversation with itself, different people's conversation with different people. Shouldn't that be in the realm of people? Why do you think that the government, frankly, should be censoring opinions? I guess my concern here is, again, if you start censoring opinions on topic A, pretty soon it's going to spread to topics B through Z. And you're saying that's not going to get walked back. I mean, that would get walked back after a time of crisis. But it seems like 2020, if anything, is the inauguration of a long string of crises to come. So I guess I don't see where the silver lining is going to come on the other side of this apparent apocalypse. Bradley, what's your take on that?
So I think that's a good point. I would push back on the point that that the tech companies are afraid of antitrust lawsuits. I don't think that these tech companies are afraid of anything. In fact, the U.S. attorneys are always sending letters to Google, Facebook, Twitter, and they're just constantly ignoring them. Facebook just a few weeks ago said that they were willing to, if European regulators go farther against them to corral their practices, they'd be willing to take away their services from hundreds of millions of people in the European Union. These companies are trying to strong-arm people because they know their governments, because they know that their technology is superior. I mean, Google's have faced so many lawsuits, even just here in Europe. For example, Google Maps, when they were just taking pictures inside of people's houses. And this is also in Japan, they were doing this. And Google Maps was banned for some time, at least. Actually, I think it might still be in Germany and the Czech Republic here, but there are some places. These companies don't care about government, and they're certainly not afraid. I mean, Google is, I think it's the second biggest lobbyist, if not the biggest lobbyist in the European Union. And in the United States, they have pretty much all the politicians in their pocket. And in fact, Google was instrumental to the election of Barack Obama. Different data companies are behind Donald Trump, and I'm certain that Google, especially, is behind Joe Biden's candidacy. I'm sure that he probably has current or former executives helping him. In fact, the whole datization of
Eric Schmidt, former head of Google, moved away, moved out of Alphabet entirely. Went straight into Milint. He went straight into the military-industrial complex. I mean, the connections are there on a high level. But I'm just going to bring it back. Literally, I think at the end of the last segment, you were just talking about the 400-page report that came out yesterday from Democratic lawmakers in Congress. It seemed like you were bringing that out as a sign that the government might have some hand on the reins. But now you're saying that social media isn't afraid. They're not afraid. They feel invincible. I guess I'm confused. Which is it?
Well, they feel invincible, but I think that we are starting to come to some awareness now because of people, for example, like Shoshana Zuboff with her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which you can find in bookstores all over the world now. People are starting to actually realize, and I think that there are some parts of the government, some people, for example, in the United States Senate, like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, are becoming more aware of this. And I think that with public pressure, there can be something, perhaps maybe in a Biden administration, but I'm very skeptical that would actually happen. So I guess from the principled perspective, which could be a long ways off, I think that we need to regulate these companies. But again, the pandemic is the most pressing issue. This is the primary contradiction that we're facing across the world right now that's causing untold suffering. The longer that this disease spreads, I mean, it's not just about government regulations that are hurting the economy. It's the actual disease itself, the virus. if we can't get it under control, every time that we have a lockdown, or let's put it this way, every wave of the virus, the first one, the second one, potentially the third or fourth, like we had with the Spanish flu, there was like 4 waves in different areas. Each one of those is probably going to be, it's probably going to affect economic growth for another 2 years. So every time, you can think of it like this, every time we have a wave of the virus, it's another 2 years added on top of the damage that's already done to get back to where we were at the fourth quarter of 2019. So in my mind, this is the most pressing issue when it comes to human safety and human development. And I personally prioritize that above everything else.
I understand that. I do feel you on this. And even prioritizing human development above everything else, I get that too. But we have great qualms on this. And I understand how bad Trump is. Trump is an ogre. I agree with you 1,000% that Trump is responsible for getting people killed, just in the way that he's going himself, just the role model that he sets in that sense. But that's secondary. I mean, from the standpoint of a conversation about censorship and the ability for a person to be able to speak or get their opinion across, and these platforms and how far they should go in the regulation of the individual and everything else, all of those things, it's the primary conversation in this. So I understand Trump is horrible, but Trump is just an example. I mean, what we're talking about is how far does speech go and when should it be regulated? And that right there, like you said, that's an argument for the public to have. Let me ask you this, a better question in regards to what you expect and what you want. If you got what you want, what would this look like at the end of it all? Meaning, if you were able to regulate the companies, let's say, you got the regulations that you wanted Congress to pass, what would it look like after?
Well, I'll just say there is an existing example of a country that's been able to do, to both regulate social media companies and surveillance capital firms, and also manage the pandemic, and that's China.
You said that was China? China is the one that has managed to do both?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, China has the strictest data protection laws in the world. Companies like Google have marginal, almost insignificant influence in the country. And the government regulates the surveillance capitalists to a point where, it's not surveillance capitalists that are manipulating people's behavior and so on. And you can see, because of this, the government was able to effectively contact trace the pandemic. And now in the entire country of China that has the largest population in the world, they're having double-digit coronavirus cases per day, and they've had that for months.
But doesn't that create its own problems? I mean, whether you're talking about a tech company having access, and I think I agree with Shane on this, the governments themselves put pressure on those tech companies to take certain behaviors. And like you said, they may not get rid of Telesur or Press TV or us for any long length of time. When it gets involved in some kind of war, some kind of conflict, or some kind of messaging operation, the government puts its influence. If China is the one that has the data protection and they have the ability to basically have the reins on that, because you are also right about something else. Facebook was doing these kind of tests to influence people's moods and their opinions, finding that depending upon the content that you show people would take a certain disposition. This is, at this point, I guess this is our world. And I think the thing is figuring out how to grapple with it. So I do appreciate you coming on, Bradley. Absolutely, 1,000%. And I definitely want you to come back on, because this is a great conversation that we're having on this issue of free speech and action and consequence. This is Bradley Blankenship, Prague-based American journalist, political analyst, and freelance reporter, whose column can be found at rtcgtn.com. Great conversation, Bradley. Thank you for coming on. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Guys. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour of today's show, the most disruptive show in those divided states of America. Of course, we're disruptive, but we didn't divide those states. We're just kind of responding to that divide and hopefully magmatically trying to bring some of those divided sides back together. In the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-hosts, trying to bridge those divides, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I'm having a little bit of fun. I try to bring my voice a bit lower there, and then it just hits rock bottom. And the hope here is that I'm not going to strain my voice over time. I'm just going to keep deepening it. But hey, that doesn't work. That's not how your lungs. That's not how your vocal cords work. It just starts to hurt. In any event, let's get straight into the news this morning. First up, I'm going to start with this. In advance of Vice President Pence's and Senator Kamala Harris's debate tonight, Pence's team has agreed to allow a plexiglass divider for his side of the stage, according to the Commission on Presidential Debates. The concession came after Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, told the Washington Post earlier Tuesday that their team did not view plexiglass dividers as medically necessary, given that the two debaters will be more than 12 feet apart. This also comes as Trump's aide Stephen Miller tested positive for the coronavirus. He is married to one of Pence's top staffers, Katie Miller, who had traveled to Salt Lake City to help the vice president, potentially jeopardizing her involvement in the event. She had previously been infected with the coronavirus, and it's not clear what effect her husband's diagnosis would have on the Pence entourage. The University of Utah, the site of the debate, requires a 14-day self-quarantine for anyone exposed to someone with COVID-19. We'll see if that keeps this debate from happening. I doubt, however, that it will. It's today, so that would be a major shock. Anyway, Joe Biden spoke Tuesday afternoon, that's yesterday afternoon, overlooking the battlefield where Union soldiers tilted the tide of the Civil War in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Today, once again, we are a house divided. That's according to Biden. He's echoing the words of President Abraham Lincoln with the house divided part of that. But that, my friends, can no longer be. We actually have a clip of this. Engineer Andre, I'm going to ask you, can you please play this clip from Biden? This is from yesterday at Gettysburg.
Today, once again, we are a house divided. But that, my friends, can no longer be. We are facing too many crises. We have too much work to do. We have too bright a future to have it shipwrecked on the shoals of anger and hate and division. You don't have to agree with me on everything, or even on most things, to see that we're experiencing today is neither good nor normal. I made the decision to run for president after Charlottesville. Close your eyes and remember what you saw. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and the KKK coming out of the fields with torches lighted, veins bulging, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. It was hate on the march, in the open, in America. Hate never goes away. It only hides. And when it's given oxygen, when it's given an opportunity to spread, when it's treated as normal and acceptable behavior, we've opened a door in this country that we must move quickly to close. 210,000 Americans dead, and the number's climbing. It's estimated that nearly another 210,000 Americans could lose their lives by the end of the year. Enough. No more. Let's just set partisanship aside. Let's end the politics and follow the science. Wearing a mask is not a political statement. It's a scientific recommendation.
And we're back again. That was Biden speaking at Gettysburg in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Biden's speech came the day that a Monmouth University poll showed him leading Trump by 11 percentage points in Pennsylvania. That's a critical swing state that could tip the winner over 270 electoral votes on Election Day. President Trump yesterday has called for a repeal of the Communications Decency Act, that is Section 230. At its core, that law provides immunity for website publishers from third-party content. Basically, it says that internet platforms that host third-party content, that would include tweets on Twitter, posts on Facebook, photos on Instagram, reviews on Yelp, news outlets, reader comments, and again, tweets, Trump's favorite, those platforms would be liable for what third parties post if this were to be repealed. Again, basically, Section 230 protects them from that liability. Without this law, again, a Yelp reviewer could post something defamatory about a business, and that business could sue the reviewer and Yelp for libel. So that would be a big call. This came in a tweet yesterday at a little after noon. President Trump tweeted, quote, "Repeal Section 230, exclamation point, end quote. And that was in all caps, by the way, just to give a sense of the ferocity there. Mexico's Cancun is bracing for possibly catastrophic hurricanes. Hurricane Delta, specifically the Category 4 hurricane on the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale, was packing maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, down from 145 miles per hour earlier in the evening. That's according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center. Mexicans formed long lines at supermarkets near Cancun on Tuesday to stock up in preparation for a hit overnight from powerful Hurricane Delta. It was weakening as it bore down on the Caribbean resort and its famous shoreline. Delta is forecast to weaken and linger over that peninsula before strengthening again in the Gulf of Mexico, where oil companies are bracing for impact on their installations and ports are closed. Officials ordered evacuations of Cancun's hotel zone and other coastal areas and opened the city's convention center as a shelter. According to a new nationwide poll from NPR, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, 1 in every 4 rural U.S. households have been unable to get medical care for serious problems. Among those households that had trouble getting care, more than half reported that a family member experienced negative health consequences as a result. We were talking about this earlier. That's a big deal. That is the exact opposite of what you would want to see in the middle of a pandemic, although, one crisis sort of adds to another. There's a mutual contribution there, a kind of negative synergy happening. And that's what we're happening as we see our state continuing to decline. That's at least my take. Eddie Van Halen, rock guitar virtuoso, has died at the age of 65. Van Halen was widely revered by his peers for perfecting the technique of two-handed tapping on the guitar neck. He was born in Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a devoted fan of Eric Clapton as a young dude. By 1974, he had consolidated a group of musicians into a band using the title Van Halen, including his brother, drummer Alex Van Halen, vocalist David Lee Roth, and bassist Michael Anthony. Mr. Van Halen's son, Wolfgang, said in a statement that his father had, quote, lost his long and arduous battle with cancer, end quote. That statement did not say where he had died. A long-awaited report from top Democratic congressional lawmakers about the 4 biggest tech giants sent a clear message on its release yesterday that Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google engage in a range of anti-competitive behavior, and that U.S. antitrust laws need an overhaul to allow for more competition in the U.S. internet economy. The report's introduction states it like this, quote, to put it simply, companies that once were scrappy, underdog startups that challenged the status quo have become the kinds of monopolies we last saw in the era of oil barons and railroad tycoons, end quote. The report from Democratic lawmakers recommends creating new laws that would potentially break up tech companies and make it harder for them to pursue acquisitions. It also calls for clarifying existing antitrust laws with the goal of making them easier to enforce, particularly for tech companies. For now, the report's recommendations are only high-level guidance to Congress for potential future legislation. It won't lead to immediate action against these companies. In Greece, a Greek court has declared the Golden Dawn Party is a criminal organization. This comes after a trial that lasted for more than 5 years. Big crowds gathered outside the court in Athens as judges gave verdicts on 68 defendants. That party, Golden Dawn, won 18 members of parliament in 2012 as Greeks were battered by a financial crisis, although they no longer have any members in parliament. The criminal inquiry into the party began with the murder of an anti-fascist rapper in 2013. The leader of the group and 6 colleagues were convicted of heading a criminal group, and a supporter was found guilty of murdering that musician. 15 others were convicted of conspiracy in the case. Some 2,000 police were reportedly deployed around the Athens appeals court as thousands of protesters demanded long jail terms, carrying banners that read, "Fear will not win," and "Nazis in prison." Golden Dawn officially denied being a neo-Nazi movement, but its badge closely resembled a swastika. Some senior members praised Adolf Hitler, and the clothing of choice at anti-immigrant protests was black t-shirts and combat trousers. And in my last headline this morning, the Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan has resigned. Prime Minister Kubatbek Boronov resigned Tuesday after widespread unrest pushed the country's electoral body to cancel the results of Sunday's parliament elections. Boronov, an ally of President Sarun Bejinbekov, was replaced by a nationalist politician that protesters released from jail the day before. Unrest over the vote left almost 700 hurt and 1 dead and appeared to be spreading Tuesday to other parts of the country. Kyrgyzstan's Central Electoral Commission said that it had, quote, invalidated the election results, end quote, which saw parties close to Jeenbekov dominate results amid accusations of mass vote buying. The results sparked a tumultuous Monday night in the capital, Bishkek, with protesters seizing government buildings and freeing high-profile politicians from prison. One of the people freed there was former President Almazbek Atambayev. So that's a big deal. We should get somebody on to talk about this soon, Jamarl. And with that, we are through them. You've been listening to Headlines on Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And you know what, Jamarl? I'm going to hand it to you because I think we do have in the next couple of minutes time to get to that other clip. I'm going to let you set this up for us.
Oh yeah. So, I've been on my perch with this argument that you get our vote when you represent our interests, and that's democracy. That's representative government. That's how government should work, right? The politician wants to get in office, and in order to get in office, he says, "Hey, what do you need?" Or better yet, that politician leaves a community because the community has all sorts of problems, and he said, "I'm going to Washington to fix the problems with that community." Backwards. Instead, we have blacks, we have lefties, and we have a lot of Hispanics that throw themselves at the Democratic Party, believing in their heads, because they believed this for 40 years, that you have nowhere else to go. And Michelle Obama is now weaponized in order to make that point very clear. Let's play the clip.
Look, you all know that politics has never been my thing. But to all the young people out there, to all the black and brown folks, to anyone who feels frustrated and alienated by this whole system, I get it. I really do. But in the face of all of the frustration and alienation I've experienced throughout my life, never once have I considered not voting as a viable option. Not once have I thought about foregoing a right and privilege that so many before me fought and died for. Not once have I let someone else's ignorance and hatred keep me from doing my duty as a citizen. Because I know we don't have the luxury to assume that things are going to turn out okay. We cannot afford to withhold our votes or waste them on a protest candidate. One of these 2 men will be president. And only if we vote for Joe Biden with power and with passion will our voices even have a chance at being heard.
I get it. Trump is a monster. Trump is the end of all things. Trump will destroy democracy itself. I would make the argument that democracy itself is undermined by Joe Biden winning the race in this very specific way, where he does not care about the looming issues and the problems in our particular context. And by the way, I get it. If Trump is so much of a monster, if he is such the end of all things, then how does the Democratic Party justify not supporting policy that 88% of Democrats back, that 70% of the public backs, in the midst of a pandemic where you have nearly 40 million people out of their health care and 7 million infected? If Joe Biden, and they were really that concerned, they would appropriate policy that would bring them together, bring this country together, to allow them to beat a man who they're calling the walking apocalypse. If they don't, and they're willing to tank it then that is on the party. One last point. Yes, a lot of people fought and died for my right to vote, which means that it is my right, affirmative or whether I withhold it or not, mine. I am not holding it because I'm terrified of the monster. I'm holding it because there are no candidates in this race that has decided that healthcare matters enough for them to back that policy. Let's take a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. Shout out to Shane for giving time for me to do that video. Thanks, Shane.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. By the way, we are kind of continuously taking calls throughout the show right now. So 202-521-1320. If you want to call in, that would be the best number to do so by. In fact, that's the only number to call in by. So again, 202-521-1320. We're taking calls pretty much whenever you want to give us a call. Not to sound needy or desperate here. But you know what? I'm also going to do this. We haven't done this yet in the show. Coming to you live from our station in D.C. If you guys live in that area, you can catch us on the radio there at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. But without further ado, I'm pretty sure we have him on. Daniel Lazard, journalist, author of several books about the U.S. Constitution and American urban policy. Daniel, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Decent. Better for having you with us.
Thank you.
All right. We're kind of going all over the place here, doing a grab bag of topics here. Let's start with this. The conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. We've been covering this. Nagorno-Karabakh is a sort of breakaway enclave in Azerbaijan. Armenia affiliated, practically considered a de facto part of Armenia. And Armenia and Azerbaijan have been fighting over it for years, decades at this point. It's been referred to as a frozen conflict. The last couple of weeks, that frozen conflict has quickly become unfrozen. It's been defrosted and has gotten hot quickly, not to trivialize things. Hundreds of people I hear injured, many dead at this point. Can you please give us your latest update? What's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh, Daniel?
Well, the fighting is really serious, really serious. There have been hundreds of deaths on either side, and they're bombing and rocketing one another's cities. Apparently, half the population of Nagorno-Karabakh has been displaced. So it's really serious, and other countries are being drawn in, which it makes it even more serious. Iran is watching very nervously. Russia is watching nervously, and Erdogan in Turkey is seemingly doing his best to pour gasoline on the fires. So it's bad.
Half the population, that's 140,000 people, is the total population last I saw. That would put it around 70,000 people. So you're saying hundreds of dead, tens of thousands of people becoming refugees. That's as serious as you're indicating.
Yes, it's really bad, really out of control. But the potential for a broader conflagration is even more serious. Russia is allied with Armenia. So interestingly enough, is Iran. And Turkey is backing and arming Azerbaijan. So the conflict could well become regional.
Yeah, this is not the greatest of situations, especially for that very specific reason. But it seems like Turkey is pushing Azerbaijan or at the very least the combination of the two, gives a certain impetus for the conflict. Do we know at this point what was the instigating factor in bringing, basically unfreezing this kind of cold conflict of sorts?
We don't know exactly, but it seems quite reasonable to assume that Turkey was the instigator.
Basically,
I mean, it was Turkey. I mean, Erdogan is involved in at least 4 major military theaters in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, and now in Azerbaijan. He's very aggressive. His neo-Ottoman imperial ambitions are quite real. This is not something invented by hostile propaganda. It's really quite real. And he is seemingly also pushing for an Azerbaijan war against Armenia. And of course, that just brings to mind what is at this point a century-old memory of the Armenian genocide at the hands of the then Ottoman authorities.
The Young Turks.
During World War I.
The Young Turks?
Pardon?
It was the Young Turks.
It was the Young Turks.
That was in the Ottoman Empire at the time. The new radicals that was in the group and everything else. Yeah, the Young Turks. That was the name of the political power behind that. One question on that front. The neighbors around Turkey, I would imagine they're getting pretty nervous, to put it mildly, with what seems to be, like you said, neo-Ottoman ambitions in regards to the way they've been operating with a pretty hefty militaristic intent behind what they've been doing around the globe, or at the very least in their regional area.
Yes. The Eastern Mediterranean is a flashpoint at this point. I mean, Turkey is in conflict with France, with Greece, and with Italy about both Libya and also about what appear to be major natural gas finds in the Eastern Mediterranean. Where, as you know, Turkey has a kind of a foothold in the island of Cyprus. And so the things are reaching a boil very rapidly, and there's little doubt that the aggressive factor is Erdogan. That doesn't mean that Erdogan is entirely wrong, and every other country that he's coming into conflict with is perfectly saintly. That never is the case. But nonetheless, there's no question that he is being very aggressive.
You brought up just now the conflict over oil resources. That's primarily a conflict between Turkey and Greece at this point. There's also Libya, of course, but sort of highlighting Greece here because they're also part of the European bloc. They're part of NATO.
As is Turkey.
Exactly. And that's I'm sure where you can anticipate me going. You highlight the fact that this could escalate into a regional war. What about the prospect of a global war? And furthermore, do you see NATO moving to push Turkey out as they see this aggression, as everybody sees this aggression? Daniel?
No, they're not moving to push it out because NATO is paralyzed. I mean, first of all, you have America. America is in complete, utter paralysis. What we see in the White House. There was a wonderful movie made in, I think, 2005 or 2006 called Downfall about Hitler's last days in the bunker. Great
That's an
film.
amazing movie.
Everyone should see it.
Yeah, that's an amazing movie. It's on YouTube. You can rent it if you want. Fascinating film. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Great film. Bruno Ganz plays Hitler. He does a great job. It's amazing. But the scene in the White House yesterday, reminds us, is vaguely reminiscent of that movie. I mean, you have Trump, you have people walking around in head-to-toe protective gear. Everyone's terrified. The disease is shutting the government down. And I only bring this up to say that the most interesting thing is the U.S. seems to be entirely out of the picture when it comes to Armenia and Azerbaijan. And formerly, it would have been in the thick of things, but now it seems to be completely absent.
Because we're preoccupied with our own problems. That's kind of the implication there, right?
Yeah.
There we go. You know what? I think it makes sense. Maybe let's move to another conflict. Kyrgyzstan. Protests in Kyrgyzstan, accusations against the government of vote buying. And now Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan has stepped down. former president has been released from prison. Can you please, this is not something I know about, we've been reporting on it, but we've wanted to get somebody on. Can you give us your latest? What's your thoughts on what's going over there, Daniel?
It's amazing. Well, first of all, Kyrgyzstan is a landlocked country. It's a gorgeous place. It borders China. It's in between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. It's in the middle of the mountains. Just a stunning place. If you want to take go on a hiking holiday, please, Kyrgyzstan would be a great place to do it. But the country's in chaos. It's the economy is broke. The population is impoverished. Tempers are boiling over. There's extreme factionalization, and now the major rioting has broken out in Bishkek, the capital, and the government is in chaos. So things are really moving fast, and there are a couple of things. We don't know who's involved. China could be involved. Russia could be involved. The U.S. could be involved, even though the U.S. seems to be paralyzed at this moment. But certainly the U.S. would in the past sort of had a hand in this and stirring this pot. But also, there's frankly is a chaos seems to be breaking out across the old Soviet rim, which does not bode well for Russia itself.
Russia is trying to take a somewhat of a neutral position on many of these issues, not inflame them for obvious reasons. The Kyrgyzstan one, it's fascinating to me. I have to be honest, I don't know entirely enough about it. But basically, they got rid of they called new elections. Do we know? Like you say, you don't necessarily know everything about what's been going on and everything else, or even the political sides that were involved, or even if there were outside forces involved at all. But do we know the key specific issue that that's creating this much angst in a society where they would basically collapse the government?
It seems to be number one. The economy seems to be in ruins, and when that happens, disorder and tumult almost automatically breaks out. Society is highly factionalized. There's a north-south division between the northern industrialized areas and the southern agrarian areas. But that is basically all that I know. It's a very distant country, remote part of the world. There's little journalism on the ground, and the whole thing seems fairly opaque. But it does seem to suggest that the kind of the broader post-Soviet peace that Putin succeeded in hammering out, not just in Russia itself, but in the old Soviet periphery, from Belarus into the Ukraine and into Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc. That Putin accord appears to be unraveling. And when it unravels in the periphery, then eventually it'll spread to the core.
Very interesting. Well, let's take a bit of an early break and we'll come back with the next segment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You're listening to Daniel Lazar, journalist and author specializing in the United States Constitution and American urban policy. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. We're here with Daniel Lazar, journalist and author specializing in the United States Constitution and American urban policy. So one question on something that is taking place right now. The United States and France apparently blocked the UN inspector who was basically the first one who went into Syria from giving testimony. Now, the testimony that he was going to give was going to bolster or back up the leaked documents that came basically when the whistleblowers started doing leaks saying that the OPCW had been used as a political instrument to go after Syria involving the chemical weapons strike, chemical weapons. Can you explain that? I'm fascinated by that because basically you have leaked documents that says these guys were pressured to make it appear as if there were chemical weapons dropped in Syria when it seems that they were placed, and if they were put at all, it was coming from the rebels. For France and the U.S. to block this, can you explain this and what's going on around this issue?
Yeah. I mean, this is something I've been following for really intensely since the civil war in Syria started. I mean, essentially, it's all Barack Obama's fault. Obama made it very clear that he would not get involved in Syria after the disastrous intervention in Libya unless the Syrian government crossed certain red lines. The chief of which was the use of poison gas. So when Obama said that sent a real clear signal to the rebels, and the signal was this. If you want the U.S. to intervene, which the rebels, of course, did, then you've got to make it look like the Syrian government used poison gas. It's as simple as that. So Obama, in trying to avoid getting entangled in Syria, sort of created the perfect framework to draw the U.S. in. And there would never have been a reason for the Assad government in Damascus to use poison gas. Poison gas is not very effective militarily, which is one reason why it was banned in the 1920s, because all sides recognized that it was its military utility was really, slim to none. But Assad also knew that that if he ever used poison gas, not only would he reap little advantage on the ground, but he would draw the United States in, which was the last thing he ever wanted to do. So therefore, you have a Syrian government saying do not use poison gas because it will only lead to havoc, and you have the Syrian rebels saying we got to make it look like the Syrian government used poison gas because that's the only way to bring the U.S. in and save our derrieres in this conflict. Okay? So essentially what we have seen repeatedly since 2013 have been a series of provocations, of stunts, etc., in which the Syrian rebels, acting in concert with British and U.S. intelligence, have tried to stage a series of phony gas attack events. And the OPCW has played a crucial role because they have validated Western reporting on these events. But in point of fact, what's happened is that staff members of the OPCW have revolted at the obvious misinformation that's being put out by the office. And they have leaked documents showing how shoddy and misleading and really counterfeit the OPCW's investigative techniques have been. And in this one case, in the one town in the suburbs of Damascus, there were photos showing a seemed to be a poison gas canister lying on the bed, after apparently crashing through the ceiling after supposedly being dropped by a Syrian government helicopter. So it looked really damning, and the press went wild, and it was proof positive, that Assad was the most evil man on the face of the earth, except for Vladimir Putin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when people analyzed the photograph closely and looked at the evidence, it didn't fit. In other words, the damage to the ceiling didn't correspond. with the damage to the canister. The canister was lying in an awkward position that didn't seem to reflect it being dropped from several hundred meters, et cetera, et cetera. And it was clear that the canister had, or I shouldn't say the word clear, that's too strong. Let me say the evidence strongly suggested that the canister had been placed on the bed in order to stage a phony gas attack. Okay, so that's basically what all this argument is about. And the OPCW's response to these charges and to these staff leaks has been extremely weak. Their rebuttals have been unconvincing, which is why the U.S. and France don't want this evidence getting out. Because if the evidence gets out, it'll essentially lay waste to 7 or 8 years of Western intervention in Syria, which has been a horror show, an absolute horror show. It has destroyed the country, set it back decades, killed hundreds of thousands of people, caused a major refugee crisis in 2015, whose political consequences are still reverberating, in Western Europe and across the world. It's been a disaster, but the U.S. and France and the British intelligence agencies as well, want to keep the lid on, want to keep this, this phony, destructive policy on its feet, and that's what's happening, very simply.
Sad to say, and again, this is coming from a former director. The testimony that was blocked at the UN, coming from a former director general of the OPCW. Who the Gray Zone, by the way, if you want to go check this out, folks, the Gray Zone with an A, the Gray Zone with an A.com. They have the transcript that he was supposed to read. And like he's saying, I'm just going to quote directly here from the transcript. I was removed from office following a U.S. orchestrated campaign in 2002 for, ironically, trying to uphold the Chemical Weapons Convention. That's a quote there. So irony here, if you sort of poke the surface and look just beneath it, the irony here is mammoth. Daniel.
Well, it is. I mean, it's like the U.S. portrays itself as the leader of the democratic world. The New York Times, uses describes the president as the leader of the free world, and doesn't even put leader of the free world in quotes, because it's so widely accepted that that's the American role. But in fact, the American role in Syria has been criminal, absolutely criminal. In fact, the rape of Syria is one of the most criminal events of the 21st century. And the swath of destruction the U.S. and the Britain and the French have cut across this country defies description, and the destruction is ongoing. I mean, Syria is still occupied by hostile Western-funded or Turkish-funded armies. And by the way, 1,000 Syrian fighters, Mujahideen, have been transported by Turkey into the Azerbaijan to help them in their war against Armenia.
Yeah, you're totally
right. So it
right.
all comes together.
I mean, it's criminal. I mean, what, 500,000 dead? You're talking about a situation with us still burning crops, stealing oil. And like you said, this took place broad daylight. Like the New York Times runs the story. Billions of dollars goes into Syria, with thick necks, long beards, rapists and killers, paid without tax dollars. And so there seems to be no consequence for this.
And conducted
go for it.
And conducted by a liberal administration too.
Yes. Even the Yemen war was greenlit by the Obama administration on the pages of the New York Times. Like, look, maybe one of the things of the falling empire is a discrediting of the empire. When Ronald Reagan was engaged in the the Iran-Contra affair, they kept it a secret. And Reagan gets caught. And the Gipper has to make a video saying, the buck stops with me. I didn't know anything about it. I'm sorry, kumbaya, but let's put this behind us. But at the very least, it was a big deal. It was a scandal. Oh my God. They're taking money from this, from Iran, and giving it to the death squads in South America. people cared. It became a scandal. And Obama does it. Nobody cares. Like, this is what I mean when I say, like, the moving of the political window or the moving of the political space. It gets worse. And where does it go from here? I mean, at this point, is it just open and understood that the U.S. engages in regime change wars? I mean, because Biden coming in, he's not going to be any different.
No, it's like, no, Biden will be a return. I mean, Biden was part of that team that invaded Libya, invaded Syria, and greenlit the war in Yemen. I mean, Biden was a key player. There's just no doubt about it. And Biden apparently, by the way, appears to have played a small but not insignificant role in the CIA revenge campaign known as Russiagate.
Also in Ukraine,
to cripple.
not to leave out. He was the viceroy of Ukraine. He was, in charge of Ukraine, basically.
Yes, he was in charge of Ukraine. And if ever there was a broken state, it's the Ukraine today. Not only back then, but things have only gotten worse. And he was the guy sent in to clean up corruption, and then of course, looked the other way when his own son got a corrupt little niche in the Ukrainian economy.
What do you think about this election?
Notoriously.
Pardon? I didn't hear that. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. Well, I was just asking, what do you think about this election so far?
The U.S. election? I think first of all, I think we're heading down the Kyrgyzstan road. Taking a look at what's happening in Kyrgyzstan now, and that could very well be the U.S. in 2 or 3 weeks. I think that things are out of control. I think the scene in the White House is a scene of a government breakdown. I think Trump is increasingly desperate and unhinged. He is he's taking a cocktail of steroid drugs that have significant mind-altering properties. He's soaring. He's high, and his actions are probably less rational now than even they were before. So our government is out of control. And the election is going along. I have no idea what's going to happen on November 3rd, but the electoral system is in such an advanced state of breakdown that I can't see how chaos cannot erupt on November 3rd and in the days following.
Let's do this. We've got a caller, Michael from Sydney. Michael's calling in. Michael, what's going on?
Yeah, hi. I'm Michael. You guys know me. I call in often, but I've recently had a bad case of fascism and I've been in hospital. But I'm now liberated from my fascist oppressor, as I see them from my perspective. Basically, I've missed a lot of the news, but from what I can see and what I know leading up to my fascist hospitalisation, basically, Azerbaijan, where the Russian pipeline Turk Stream runs through into Bulgaria, then into Serbia, and actually up to Hungary too. So I believe Russia is on the side of Azerbaijan as opposed to Armenia. And anyone who actually knows the true history of the Armenian genocide will know it was actually perpetrated on the retreating soldiers of the Turkmen Empire and their supporters by the diggers, or the Anzacs as we call them in Australia, and the English forces who landed in Gallipoli. That's the true history of the Armenian genocide. And Russia actually wouldn't be on the side of Armenia because basically Turkey is in control of a pipeline that supplies gas into Eastern Europe.
Well, Russia has agreements with Armenia, meaning have protection agreements. I mean, I understand what you mean, but it's not just the gas line. I mean, am I wrong? Well, to be honest, we're at the last of this. We only have a minute left. So I want to give Daniel Cesar his credit for being here. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you for coming on. Where can people find your content?
My pleasure. Oh, I write for a British publication called The Weekly Worker regularly these days. I also have a blog at daniellazar.com. So check it out.
And great conversation, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael from Sydney, thank you for the call. This is Daniel Lazar, journalist and author specializing in the United States Constitution and American urban policy. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we're going to be having an interesting conversation in this segment. But first, I want to go to our caller, Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. I have some comments I want to say today. I had written something yesterday. Trump might want to have a bank holiday to go along with that $1,200 in a food program, pay COVID-19 patients health bill, legalize marijuana for help, executive orders for therapeutics against COVID-19, and to public and make the social media companies into public utilities. Just go right past 230. Tulsi Gabbard, who I support, is backing the 4 bills. One of the bills is dealing with HR 1162, HR 1175, HR 8452 is dealing with reforming the Espionage Act and also to drop the charges on Julian Assange. And the other bills dealing with HR 8285 is dealing with prevent election fraud, which she's promoting, and I'm for to prevent it, because you have these corrupt Republicans and Democrats cheating against each other and also across the aisles. So we got to, pass those 4 bills. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for the call, Tarif. Yeah, we're planning on talking. I think we're going to have Taylor Hudak on tomorrow. We'll see. Talking about the Assange trial. 2 of the bills there have to do with Assange. One co-sponsored with Tom Cotton, one having to do generally with espionage, and another with Tom Cotton that's more directed with Assange. I want to get into this with her. Interesting stuff. I want to come back to one of the first things you brought up, though, with the idea of sort of Trump effectively nationalizing social media companies, making them public utilities. This is the same argument for me. I don't see, whether it's censorship or nationalizing these companies, I don't see how you can do that without stymieing the free flow of cultural information and truth. And I guess my take here is, it seems like the inevitable results of that would be dumbing people down effectively, giving the government and corporations at the same time much more control, integrating them, giving them much more control over what people can think, what people can say, the means of communication. I mean, as we move on to the online, as we move on to the internet more, that seems to be the trend. By and large, I don't know. I guess none of the arguments for it are compelling to me, because nobody seems to address the fundamental thing here, at least as far as I can hear, which is that when you give the government the reins on this kind of thing, it by and large does not tend to work out. Bradley Blankenship, we were talking about this with earlier, he brought up China. Admittedly, China has very effectively dealt with the virus. But the other side of this is, I mean, you can almost look at this systemically or mechanically. That's pretty good when your government is functioning in various ways. If your government is run well, if the institutions are solid, if people trust each other in the government, and there's a degree of coordination and the leadership is good, all that stuff. I could go into it further, but that would be a derailment. If it's on the upswing, then sure, giving it more power is going to increase its power. And if it's doing good things, then having more power will help it to do more good things. But the problem I see comes when the government starts to go onto the downswing. And so far, just looking across the board, there are no immortal societies. There is no society, there is no form of government, as far as I can tell, that has been perpetually on the upswing. And the problem that I see is when you give the government more power and it starts to go into the downswing, things get really, really, really bad. And I think we're seeing that in the U.S. right now, unfortunately. And I'm very hesitant to try to give the U.S. more power as it's on that downswing. I don't know. Jamarl, what's your take?
So I think I partially agree with you. I mean, the problem is, like you say, if a government is on a permanent upswing and everybody's kumbaya and everybody believes their government, no issue. It's kind of like putting a chip in somebody's head. If you are in a society that has, you don't have crime, you don't have a kind of incentive for people to take advantage and those type of things, and no one would think of doing something where you would screw with the chip to kind of make the person weird or make the person take advantage of the individual with the chip in their head, then yeah, putting a chip in your head will probably be okay. You would get all sorts of the benefits without the negatives, which is, again, computer viruses, somebody take advantage of you, etc. The same thing, I think, is true with the government, right? If everybody is kumbaya, if everybody is good, if everybody is great, then you can accrue whatever amount of power to that government that you want, because everybody, for the most part, agrees. That's a utopian society. We don't live there. And so I agree with you on that front in the terms of giving authority, but I think it's too specific to say authority in and of itself. I mean, look, there are some things that government does well. Social Security is something it does well. It may be collapsing, but Social Security keeps going. Medicare, it does well. The Postal Service, it does well.
These are all collapsing. You just said it's collapsing.
Well, because, they're attacking it.
You're saying it's collapsing at the same as you're saying it's doing well.
No. I'm just making a very basic point that there are things that government does well. But at the core of that, in terms of how much power you give to government or whatnot, that's not an absolute answer. That's somewhat of a sliding scale. I mean, under that argument,
it can be broken down. That's
I
where
guess I'm saying under that argument, you wouldn't give the government any power to do pretty much anything. I mean, should you give money to cops? Should you defund cops? Like that argument of just saying we shouldn't give authority to the government for X or for Y. I'm saying I don't know if that argument works in practice, whether the society is decaying or not.
I hear you. This is one of those philosophical antinomies. On the one hand, my opinion doesn't matter because we're just, to a large extent, spectators on this historical process that we're all living in. But we're all living in it.
It matters to me, Shane. You're my co-host, man.
It matters to me too.
Your opinion matters. Just a nudge below my wife.
No. I mean, but here's the thing. Sorry, your last comment threw me off. I had to work out what you meant. I'm honored, by the way. Your wife's opinion should always be supreme, and hopefully more than a nudge above mine. But no, here's the thing. So looking into this earlier, you're sort of refreshing myself for some reason. The word antinomy again comes to mind. It's this philosophical concept referring to having two contradictory beliefs that in themselves are pretty solid, in themselves are apparently true. And yet when they come together, it's a paradox. You get a contradiction between them. So on the one hand, we need government. We want government. Government protects us. If we're living in this biological superstructure of civilization, it's been incentivized by evolution. It's worked. We're living in it. On the other hand, the argument I just gave applies. When you give that organism more power, then it sort of keeps using that power for longer and longer and in harsher ways until it breathes its last breath. And frankly, the downswing isn't good, but the collapse isn't good either. Both parts of that are pretty nasty. If we want to live in a stable world, we need a stable society. We don't have the art or the science of maintaining that stable society. So I guess, this is not stuff that I've worked through. This is not stuff that you've worked through. This is frankly not stuff that humanity seems to have worked through despite thousands of years of trying. But hopefully, we're having a conversation about it. Hopefully we make a little bit of process. Ideally, we make some progress. We come up with some new way of doing things. We revitalize our society. And then hopefully that works. And in a century or two, we have to sort of reconsider things. But that's sort of how I see it. There's no permanent solution, but you need to have an understanding of the pure dynamics at play. And when people bring up the argument that we should give the government more power to make the things that the government is doing poorly, not do it poorly, I feel that there's a misunderstanding of what's actually going on here. What's your take, though, Jamarl?
Just to interrupt for a moment. I mean, the government, at the very least, is a large contingency of people in the human experience. As for corporations, those things are totalitarian systems that basically work entirely in their own self-interest with like one or two people at the top. I understand the argument where you say, oh, we shouldn't give this to government because the government is corrupt. Yeah, but the small number of individuals at the top of corporations aren't. Look, private entities, whatever they have as their territory, whether it's cash or whether it's land, it's theirs, and there will be a police force to shoot you in the face that you pay for if you ever try to step on that land or trespass. Whatever. Look, there's no utopia here. Like, there's no way out. There aren't perfect governments anywhere around the world. You may go to Denmark. Denmark is nice. And you may be like, hey, this is good. They may have their political thing, but they don't have these rival fighting at each other's throat sides. I'm pointing to this notion that part and parcel to the problem here is that cash influences everything. And as it does so, people do bad things to get their hands on it. And that's including government. Like, the issue here, I don't think it's giving power to the government or not. That power is going somewhere, whether it's with government or corporations or somewhere else. Anywhere you are is where you're at. And in this case, yes, the government may be decaying, but that is still your best interest and your best weapon against these other things. And you can potentially take that back at some point, even though right now it's wrecked. So let's put it in context, and like you said, percentages in regards to the other things around you. And this is not a rah-rah for my government and so forth. I'm just making a rah-rah for this notion of people coming together in a collective way to try to change their world. That
I hear you.
I don't think is in any way
We're in the
diminished.
box together. Fundamentally, we are rooting for the same team. We were rooting for humanity, and we might have our differences, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we agree really deeply on a lot of this stuff. And it's fun to play with the fault lines because that's where some of the growth is. That's where the potential for growth is. You create friction. That friction gives you traction, and hopefully that gets you moving. But we have a caller, one of my favorite callers, actually. If you're down with it, I think we should go to Brave from Atlanta.
Absolutely.
Brave. Yeah, Brave, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
Makes me feel pretty good. I'm one of your favorite callers, Shane. Okay, all right. I was just
It's true. It's true. Go for it.
Cool. The journalist that was on earlier, really, I don't really get triggered very often, but it really triggered me. And I guess because I had just had this conversation last night, a very long conversation with a friend over the same thing. The frustration and the fear and all of the anxiety over Trump that people are tying to Trump, that's increasingly allowing them to be willing to just give more and more power, more and more control over their lives and their voices to these large entities, whether it's corporate or government. And it just goes back to that old Ben Franklin quote, about those who would trade off liberty to
freedom. They don't deserve either.
Exactly. And even as you were talking to that guy and to the journalist, to the gentleman, I don't want to be rude to him, but even as you guys were talking to him and explaining that this power that you want to give over these social platforms to the government, because you don't like the actions of this one president, you have to understand that same power will apply for the next president and the next, and the government moving forward. And it's like he didn't even get it. Like, I feel like he didn't even get it when he brought up China as an example. Of where we should be going with our social media monitoring, and the idea, even the idea very quickly of making these social platforms a utility. That's insane to me. Because then it gives the government regulatory power over. Even though we both know that that information agencies are working with these platforms. Still, I mean, I don't think we need to tie those things together at the hip. We have enough of a fight on our hands to have our voices heard as it is. So I just want to make that comment.
We've got to go out, but I just want to thank you in closing. Thank you so much for the call. That quote, by the way, you were referencing Benjamin Franklin. I'm just going to read that quote up briefly. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. That's the quote. I don't think it's just a matter of deserving it. I don't think you would get either. I think you will lose both liberty and safety as you give that power over. And frankly, that's what we want. We want more freedom, more security, more safety. Anyway, we're closing the show out now. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You've been listening to Fault Lines. Thank you to engineer Andre. Thank you to the producers, Cam and Rakeem. And last, thank you to my great co-host, Jamarl Thomas. We'll be back tomorrow with another show. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Guys, as always, Thank you for joining us. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's see who's here. We got 272 today. Yes, the numbers are growing. We've been trying. All of us have been trying to grow the show, and so we've been trying to bring more people to the platform. 272 is really, really good. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. Fault Line, Thomas and Stranahan. You will see me later today, of course. This is not going to be the last show that I have. In fact, I may have a show immediately after this, going into another mound. Let's see, Trudy. Comments on Trump versus stimulus bill. Yes. Trudy, I did that in the monologue. It's appalling. It's like, is he on drugs? Well, that answer is yes, because I feel he's full of COVID. And so whether it's the experimental drugs, whether it's a fever, whether it's the steroids, I don't know what it is. But whatever it is, the notion that he's going to blow it off and say, I am not going to work with him, is tragic. I mean, not just for the American public, for him and his aspirations as president. I mean, think about that. American president doing that. And he's basically saying, after giving trillions to oligarchs, I don't want to give the American people an extra $1 trillion that Nancy Pelosi is trying to give. Are you serious? That's going to hold you up. The Democratic Party is trying to give you a massive stimulus package just before the election. And you're saying, I don't want it. You should have taken that and said, thank you very much, and got your Republicans in line. That's if you could have got them in line to do it. Trudy, it's appalling, to put it mildly. Thanks, Jamal. Keep telling the truth. And Willis, I try. Truth, like I said, it's hard in the absolute sense, but I do try to get my perspective of my argument, and you guys can kind of tell me whether I'm right or not. No, I'm talking about the other. That's all. All right, guys. I'm going to end this here. Thank you all. Definitely like, share, and of course, subscribe.